Hello and welcome to episode 86 of the Crate and Crowbar. It is the 31st of March 2015. My name is Chris Thurston and today I'm joined by Graham Smith.
Hello.
And Tom Francis.
Hello.
Thank you for your variously normal and irregular hellos.
It's April Fool's Day tomorrow.
It is.
Which means all our listeners will have experienced terrible April Fools and we won't know what any of them are.
Spent a decent portion of this afternoon explaining to my colleagues why I think doing April Fools is a shit idea. If you start planning your April Fools idea the day before April Fools, it's probably not worth doing, in my opinion.
Yeah. We're doing one for Gunpoint/Heat Signature, which I guess I was going to say I can't reveal, but I can reveal because you would have seen it by the time you hear this. But there's also no point in describing it because it's a purely visual thing. So enjoy that.
We'll put a link in the show notes.
Yeah. RPS is dead set against April Fools as a concept. So we, as a site, it's never done anything for that day. We'll report on April Fools that other people do, which are cool. Like, it's just sometimes a day when people make cool things.
Yeah.
I can't think of a time when I've seen an April Fool's that made me laugh, and the ones that are tricks just seem like kind of douchey lies.
Yeah, and we are really against lies. Like, really hard line.
I think the ones that the joke of promise something awesome, but it's not really going to happen, is incredibly weak as a joke, and then also just cruel to people generally.
I think Blizzard did 4 last year. They did
Blizzard always good.
One big Blizzard one, and like one for each of their like big individual series. The best one was the Subtlest, and the one generally did make me laugh out loud was the StarCraft one last year, which was the HOTS thing, when they announced that they were renaming Legacy of the Void to like Herald of the Stars, because they didn't have enough HOTS, and like the paragraph describing it, like the phrase HOTS was in every sentence, and like down the side, if you read the first letters of every sentence, like that took some time in a really subtle way, and I appreciated that. That was good.
Yeah, I remember that. That was good.
Yeah, I like the ones where it's a thing, you're not trying to fool anyone, everyone knows it's a made-up thing, but it's just a fun thing to talk about. The worst one I remember, I don't think it was last year, but a while back, was someone, it was a hardware site, and their April Fools was to report that a certain series of NVIDIA GeForce cards would fatally overheat with the new firmware, to the point where it would melt down the card, so they're telling everyone not to upgrade to the latest drivers. And it's like, that's just a massively damaging lie. Just really, like, potentially seriously impacted. I mean, it's NVIDIA, so I don't really care, but if you said something like that about one of my games or something, that would be deeply, deeply offensive and terrible.
Yeah, like Gunpoint will rewire your PC to your door, and your door will fling up and then kill your mum. Like that would be.
When these
probably
like,
liable,
graphics cards is already a thing that people just don't understand. People don't understand what's going on.
And that's happened, I'm sure. There have been instances where, like, you can, like, firmware upgrade a card to the point where it doesn't measure its own temperature correctly and can overheat and damage its components.
And like, I think all three of us know that when you work in like a gaming information source, everything you say will be taken incredibly literally, regardless of the context in which you present it. You know, PC Gamer has had backpage jokes for a million years. Yep. And, I got death threats once when I made a funny joke about Half-Life, so, like...
Shouldn't have put 13 holes in that grill on the elevator.
I actually, the PC game that isn't out yet, but is out fairly soon, has another Half-Life 3 gag in the all over, and I kind of want to see if it'll happen again. Like, have they got wise to the fact that the joke page is not where we put reveals of the single biggest PC game reveal of what would now be all time, but, apparently not, so...
I accidentally announced The Sims 3 Pets by doing...
Sims 3 Pets Cataclysm?
Yeah, because it was like, World of Warcraft Cataclysm rips up the world, so what other games would it be funny to put a Cataclysm in? So we did Sims... I think there was like a Sims 2 Pets, and Sims 3 had just come out, and so we did Sims 3 Pets Cataclysm, because it'd be funny to see dogs and cats falling down a massive rift in the park. And our deputy art editor at the time, Amy, did an amazing Photoshop job of this, and it was just hilarious. And so, I mean, obviously a joke. I think even the people who took it as an announcement still got that it was a joke, but then they thought it was a joke building on top of the announcement of Sims 3 Pets.
Yeah, not really catching on to the fact that it was displayed on a page alongside, I think, like Football Manager 2013 Cataclysm, which is like a picture of a football pitch with a giant rift through the middle of it.
I accidentally announced wanking in The Sims through the same medium where we did a like an IKEA page when we had a reveal on The Sims 4 where the big thing was, emotional interactions interactions with objects based on how your sim is feeling. And one of them was like the depressed interaction with a bed was solo woohoo. And the Sims community really latched onto that to the point where if you typed in The Sims 4 like in Google, one of the autocomplete results, like in the top 5 autocomplete results, was Sims 4 solo woohoo. The long awaited feature that still actually hasn't come to the series. Sims is getting an expansion pack this week. It's almost topical. I haven't played it yet, but you probably still know wanking in The Sims. Maybe calling back to last week's discussion of how these simulations fail to capture the majority of human life. But still, it's still not a real page. Just not a real page, really. It's jokes, isn't it?
It is.
Graham.
Yes.
What are we playing?
I've been playing The Magic Circle, which is Jordan Thomas's new game. Jordan Thomas of BioShock fame. Previously of Thief fame, he made The Cradle, everyone's favourite level, and he made, was it Fort Frolic? It was called in BioShock 1, the best part of BioShock 1. He's gone indie, left Irrational after BioShock Infinite was done, and he's making a game about making games. And he's making a game which it's hard not to read as being based strongly on his experiences working in AAA. And it's going to be interesting, the inevitable op-eds that get written relating characters in that game to, I don't know, Ken Levine, perhaps. And I'm sure it's not. And I'm like, Ken Levine and Jordan Thomas are friends and have worked together for years and years.
There's not like a guy called Len Caveen in it.
No, but it's a game about you being the playtester of a game which is unfinished, and as you're going through the world, which is in... It's stylistically, so it's got so many ideas in it that it's hard to pick a point to start, but it's in black and white, but as you walk around, the bits of the ground underneath your feet are in colour, and as you're exploring different parts of the world, there are these giant floating eyes, which are zipping about in the sky, and which talk and narrate, and talk to each other, and talk to you, and they are the game developers. And so it's the lead designer who's been working on this sequel to this beloved series of games, and he's been working on this for years, and he keeps redesigning it, and it's the kind of sarky, frustrated other designer who's working with him who really just wants out of her contract but can't get out, and then it's the fangirl who's completely obsessed with the series and has managed to get a job working on it and is trying to make it good. And you, as the playtester, start off kind of doing their bidding, but through circumstance and plot points, which I won't spoil, get broken loose of that and are set free within this world with the ability to suck up life. I think it's just called life, is it? From these magical crackling portals that you can then use to draw rings around elements and creatures within the world and then edit their code.
This sounds like, sorry to interrupt, but everything you just said about the setup for it and the plot sounds like it's changed a lot since I played it. So it was always about, there's this game being made and you're inside it, but when I played, unless I just missed loads and loads of stuff, it wasn't clear who you were or what the hell was going on, and there was no guided part exactly. There was like a message that sort of played a bit like a shitty RPG that was half finished for like a second, and then you were just left with you have a guide, the old pro guy, but there was it didn't see anyone talking to each other except through finding audio logs later on. Okay. And there was only one thing in the sky, and it was the boss of that section.
Huh. Yeah, then it's definitely changed a whole bunch, because it starts off now with a kind of cutscene, which is just illustrated through doodles on a whiteboard, because it's not been done yet, and it's the main character, the main developer is narrating it, and he's telling his story, and he's talking about the bits that aren't done yet, and then there's a kind of introductory sort of bit where you are going through part of the world, and there's like a giant locked door with 4 portals into different worlds that you have to go into and retrieve keys. But the joke is that as you try to go into each of those worlds, you just get a message that says, this isn't done yet, so for playtesting reasons, here's just the key. And then you use that to open the door and so on. But this whole intro section, so like it has a good joke earlier on where you come into a village which is on fire and everyone's just been killed, and you get handed a sword. You get handed a sword by someone who's dying, and you have to go kill the giant which has destroyed this village, and you're the hero. But then the developer turns up and explains that we can't have weapons in this game because that's going to make a bunch of the other programming issues too difficult. And so he has one of the other developers erase the sword from your hand. To make it clear very early on that this is not a first-person game where you're going to be running around killing stuff.
That's good.
And then you go and you find the giant, which is like destroyed this town, but it's not been like animated yet, so it's just a static model that this hovering eye, almost like using a gravity gun, like puppets it around while he does the voice, so if like it's angry dialogue and, you know, before you're going to fight it, stuff like that. And then it's at that point you get killed, actually, and that's how you end up like breaking loose of the programming. And then they don't realise that you're still in the game world after you've died at that point. And then you go off into the world. And so, but the main mechanic of it is your ability to reprogram things. Sort of like hack and slash is a recent example. You draw a circle around creatures, and then you can change their properties. And their properties are how they travel, who their allies are, who their enemies are, what attacks they've got, what special abilities they've got, and that kind of thing. And you can either take all those powers for yourself, in which case you can then give them to other creatures that you encounter later on.
You can't use them yourself, can you?
No, you can't use them yourself, or at least not as far as I've got through it. But like, so one of the first things I did is I encountered a dog, and I made it an ally. And it was following me around, and that was cool because you've got this little pet friend, although I didn't have any way for it to attack yet. And then I found a rock, just like an inanimate object, but when I looked at it, it had a name. And so I took the walk along ground ability from my dog and I gave it to the rock, and it grew eyes, and now it can like hop along and follow me about. Like,
first thing you need to walk is eyes.
What happened to the dog?
Well, the dog just loses its legs, and now it's just like on the ground. It just turns and watches you because it's still allied with me at that point, but he can't move.
I love you so much, Master.
And then you use this basically to solve either traversal problems. So, like, for example, there's like a giant kind of slow-moving turtle creature, and rocks by default are fireproof. Can't set a rock on fire, so you can take that fireproof ability from that, give it to the giant turtle creature, and then sit on the turtle's back in order to ride across lava that's blocking your path. Or, more generally, what you're doing is you're finding enemies or block doors, and reprogramming them in order to fight their friends and fight for you, or give them the ability to travel through a door or turn off a door that you can't. But part of the story behind it is that this is a game which has been in development for a long time, and it's changed a lot over the course of its development, and you are able, with this resource life, which is what you're using to reprogram everything, to bring back previous versions of the game world. So things that the creators have deleted from it, you can find like ghostly images of them and bring them into the world, almost like BioShock Infinite. And one of the first things that you find is like a science fiction version of the game, which is much lower resolution than the rest of the world. It's kind of like slightly pixelated and fuzzy, and it's basically System Shock 2. You basically bring a space station into the world, which is like full of corpses and locked doors, and it is rendered in that kind of fuzzy, pixelated software rendering that System Shock was.
It might be more System Shock 1 in terms of like the colour scheme and the heavy pixelation.
I haven't played System Shock 1, so I didn't want to make that comparison. But you, like the corpses, like any object basically in the world, you can change the code of it. So you can go into the corpses and say that they are your ally and they travel by ground, in which case the corpses that have no heads kind of leap up onto their feet and start following you around, and you end up to a point where you've got 4 or 5 little friends that are trundling along behind you everywhere you go, and you can give them commands to move. So to go over here, to go attack these people, to stay here while I go do something, that sort of stuff. And so it's this mixture of like Darwinia and hack and slash and Stanley Parable with all the narration stuff, and riffing on you as a player and very meta about developers. And it's not as funny as Stanley Parable is, but it's very... I don't know. I've got 2 chapters of it, and I've not got to the second chapter yet, which I think is more new stuff that no one's seen before, but it's very smart, is my sense of it so far. And I'm interested to see how far it can take its ideas, because my concern with it is that it gets too dry, or that I've already seen the kind of clever ideas of it, and that everything from now on is just going to be encountering different types of enemies with different abilities and taking those abilities and giving them to other things. And I don't know how much you can remix that to keep it fresh and interesting, and whether it will just maybe disappear up its own arse a little bit, because I think that's always the risk when you're doing a thing which is very postmodern, essentially.
I feel like the mechanical stuff will continue to be interesting, because it was, even in the bit I played, which is probably less than you've played so far, there was just so many ways to go about things, and so many tricks you can do. In the build I played, there were corpses, and I could edit them. They were like a thing I could interact with, but I never thought to give them the walking movement, so just as you're saying that, I was like, oh shit, there's even more I could be doing. And that stuff is really cool. The development stuff, I'm interested to see how it's shaping up now, but like the voices of the developers who made this game. When I played it, there were audio diaries, like hovering cassette tapes, I think they were, just in midair, and you use those and then you listen to them. Sort of, it was particularly, I can't remember her name. They all have slightly weird otherworldly names. But I think it was a girl who's like really, dissatisfied with her current job, disillusioned, and is kind of ranting about the Starfather, who's the creative lead, who sounds to me like, I mean, obviously it's a mishmash of different people, but I get strong hints of Richard Garriott in there, because he's a legendary fantasy auteur, and he's not just not only a kind of a name in development, but also a character in the game. Like, he has his own persona in the game, like Lord British with Richard Garriott. But also he's massively arrogant, and I'm saying this as well as being similar to Lord British in some ways. He's also massively arrogant, and the game itself is very much a Duke Nukem Forever of its world. It's a thing that's been, I think it's like 20 years delayed or something, and everyone thinks it's vaporware, and that's really interesting. But listening to the audio diaries of the developers talking, there's lots of kind of inter-office politics, and this girl was talking about who she's pissed off with the office and how she stayed late last night and that kind of stuff. And the fact that it was so far from what I was actually playing, like, audio diaries are always kind of set in a different world. Like BioShock, you're listening to what people were saying back when it was actually a populated place and people were walking around, and same with System Shock. And they're always kind of like traces of a different world, but usually it's at least the same place that it was taking place in, whereas these are they're taking place in a world I can't even picture, because it's a development studio that's totally unlike what I'm actually seeing here. And so I had a hard time kind of engaging with any of them. I would listen, they'd be playing, but also, while I'm listening to it, I'm also walking around the world, and I was really interested in the world. There's loads of mechanical stuff to play around with, and lots of stuff is just happening all the time. So I found myself tuning out of the story stuff, so that's one possible concern, I think. But that said, that version was, I mean, I think I played it at GDC last year, so more than a year older than the one you're playing. And that intro sounds a lot slicker and a lot better at leading you in. It's such a funny thing, because it's set within an unfinished game, so the fact that it was incredibly unfinished when I played it was very hard to pick apart which parts I didn't think they were going to polish it up as much as it sounds like they have. I thought most of it was going to stay roughly the same. The only thing, like, as soon as I started, as a text box popped up that just said, like, had a sort of question mark for the profile and then said, like, text to come. And I asked Jordan, okay, so I know that isn't in there yet, but what's this meant to say? And he says, no, that's final. Oh, okay. So it's unfinished in the meta game, but not in this game that I'm playing. But then that whole area has totally changed, and the way the intro starts is totally different now. So maybe they'll do a better job of it, like, of hooking you on the developer story.
It definitely helps, I think, the developer story that you can, even though they're just giant floating eyes, the fact that you can see the two characters that are bickering and getting on. There is still developer diary stuff in there, but I quite like it because it's one of the few games where audio logs make sense. It is literally developer commentary that they're recording about the areas that you're playing, you know, and it's quite pompous and arrogant because it's the lead designer saying, you know, even though he's not finished the game yet, he wants to talk about his vision for this game and what he's trying to do with it. So you're finding these nodes around the place.
That's a very, like, mod team thing to do, I think, doing the grandiose developer commentary before you finish the fucking game.
It's also, they use the floating eyes and that storytelling mechanic to good effect to introduce all the different enemies. Because, like, at this point I've already encountered like 10 or 11 different types of creatures, but you come into an area and one of the developers will be trying to set up a creature for the first time, like off in the distance, and you can hear two people talking as one of them is learning how to edit the code just in the same way that you're now doing. And they use that to introduce the creatures and introduce the mechanics of editing the stuff. It's, at the moment, it came with an email, the code came with an email, which was quite detailed about the stuff that's unfinished that will change and the stuff that's unfinished, which is meant to be unfinished. And one of the things that they said would change is that it is quite dense at the moment, at the start, because you've got like an introductory cutscene and then you've got the dialogue narration over the top, and then you've got the former old programmer pro player guy that's guiding you, and you've got the dev diary stuff, and so there's like multiple different layers to this reality, and you're getting a lot of text and different stuff coming at you. But the other thing I wanted to commend it for was I really love the style of it and the way it carries that through everything, so that, you know, it's a first-person game where you're going around the world and interacting with elements that are bringing up, like, text interfaces to edit the code, but if you hit escape to go back to the main menu, the camera kind of zooms back into an area which is still first-person, so that the save game button is floating in 3D space and you can turn around, and so that button is floating behind you. And it does nice things as well, where it does the Fez thing, where you get the kind of intro company logos, and then you play a bit of the game, and then something happens that gives you a new ability in the game, and it crashes and resets and takes you back to the main title screen, but something is different. And the Magic Circle does the same thing of like title screen, playing a bit, going back to the title screen, and then breaking that title screen in such a way that you can suddenly move around within it, and so the words spelling out the name of the game are now in 3D space, and it's incredibly cohesive. Like the theme of it carries through every part of it aesthetically, the audio, every part, which is clever.
There was a really good bit in the build I played where, as you're kind of learning to edit these creatures, and like they have this very modular AI system, and you can literally take behaviors out of one and put them in the other, as you say. And there's an audio diary about that, and I think one of the more kind of idealistic designers or programmers, I didn't really keep track of who everyone was, is saying, like, oh, I've got the cool new behavior where, like, anything can be given this, like, roaming, hunting behavior, and someone else is explaining, no, we don't have, like, space for that, that can go too badly wrong, we just need them to actually just be bullet sponges for the player and just walk up to them and just attack repeatedly, and all these interesting, like, ecosystem type interactions where they have different reactions to each other. We just got to scrap all that because it's too much work, which is a real thing that happens in game development and is actually like that is represented in the mechanics of this game. You could go around making everything just be a thing that attacks everything on sight, or you could actually set up interesting interactions between them.
It mentioned, I played through that as well, but it mentions it, I think maybe it's different, but it mentions it in terms of the animation, of how like difficult it is to get animation to look nice when things are attacking each other, and the player can see that without being attacked themselves.
That shows really badly in some games, actually. But I've seen that phenomenon, and I've never thought less of a game for it. You know, even if it looks really fucking weird when character X attacks character Y, I still think it's great that they can attack each other.
Yeah, one of my favourite things to do in pretty much any game.
Since Doom, where the imps could shoot a fireball that accidentally hit the zombie guy, and then the zombie guy would shoot the imp and they'd kill each other. Good times. What did you think of the old Pro the guide character.
I was slightly confused about who he was.
Yeah, I definitely don't know who he is.
Like, he appears in the world as, like, a rock face with glowing eyes, and you kind of, you find zones in the world which are kind of blank and crackly, and you shoot life into it, and he kind of emerges out of the game world, and he's been trapped in the code in some way that I don't fully understand, and I don't know, there's a lot to grasp in that game between the current game, the previous versions of the game, the floating eye things, and then this deep-voiced giant rock monster that's talking to you. And there's a point at which you find, within the System Shocky world, you find a version of him in a coffin.
Yeah.
And have to... What is that? Is he a real person?
I had, you find, well, I don't know much more than you, but you find a body that represents this guy, and I was going around with a bunch of dogs. I programmed a lot of dogs to follow me. And the first dog I ever found, for some reason, one of its behaviours when I was editing, said, okay, your ally is me, and your enemy is not me. Your enemy is, corpses. And so from then on, any time we saw a corpse, the dog would just race over to it and bite it and bite it and bite it. And I don't think he actually, I think you can destroy them, but they kind of go ghostly, and then you can bring them back if you need to. And so when we found the old pro's body, my dog just pounced on it, bit it to death and destroyed it. I think that was plot relevant. I don't know what it was supposed to do, but not that.
Do you find all the creatures kind of cute?
Well, I think they've changed appearance since I played it, from recent screenshots anyway. So they're pretty basic when I saw it, like a sort of, the dogs were blue wolf things that were pretty standard. But as soon as something's on your side, it's kind of automatically cute.
The dogs now are like, they're not really dogs, they're like alien sort of things with like spikes around their necks, but giant kind of cartoon eyes.
Yeah, I think that's
kind of
new.
bug-eyed things. But yeah, as soon as everything's on your side, it's kind of cute. And they all walk in this kind of haphazard way, like essentially riffing on the kind of animations you got in 1996 first-person shooters. And that means that I can't take the powers from a lot of the creatures because I feel bad. Like, I don't want to go up to a thing that has autonomy and has life and take away its ability to walk so I can give it to some other thing. And so I'm kind of like, oh, I feel too bad to like take away your legs, and so I end up, okay, I'll take away your thing, your legs, and give it to the rock so he can walk, but then I'm going to give you the pick-upable trait, because you can decide whether something can be picked up or not without having to have that finite supply of that ability. It's just a toggle within its code. And so I end up like, okay, you can keep your ability to walk, but I'm going to carry this guy in my hands so he doesn't get left behind.
You might be too bleeding heart for this game.
It's amazing to me that the one successful way to elicit real empathy from players is dogs. It's just always dogs. You can do whatever you like with however creative or how ambitious or artistic your game is to make someone really care about a depiction of war or suffering or human-on-human violence. Isn't never going to fucking work. Doesn't matter how good technology gets. Dogs.
I think I'm not as empathetic as you, because I found a bunch of like lava barnacles, like things that they're sort of built into the ground and they fire out rings of fire, and they're a sort of environmental hazard. You can't get past them unless you something that's fireproof, you get past them, and they have a fireproof trait. And I managed to get into a situation where I could edit them, and I picked one, and I wasn't really thinking about what I was doing, but John Thomas was watching over my shoulder and laughing because he could see all the consequences of what I was doing, and I guess I programmed him to hate all other fire barnacles and took away his ability to be fireproof and then left him where he was, so that his first move was like, I'm surrounded by fire barnacles, kill them all, and like shot out his ring of flame. They're all completely unharmed by this because they're all fireproof, and they all retaliate at once and hit him, who's now not fireproof, and so he was destroyed.
I'm stuck at the moment with an enemy called Hivers. Did you come up to those?
Yeah, those are in there.
They're being controlled.
Pick up by a hive mind thing.
Yeah, and which means you can't reprogram them until you defeat the hive mind thing that's controlling them, but
yeah,
that's out of reach, and so that's the point at which I'm stuck at.
Right. That's really kind of creepy, but at least when I played it, because there's just these lines coming out from this one central place connecting everything that's being controlled by the hive mind, and you can't see what's controlling it. and they're just like little weird maggot things, and they're fucking everywhere, and they start killing everyone, and you can't change them, and it's kind of creepy. That's a really, once you get the ability from that, though, that's a really cool thing.
Chris,
Hi.
what have you been playing?
I have been playing Offworld Trading Company, which has been in Steam Early Access for a little while now. It is a new strategy game by Soren Johnson, who is the lead designer on Civ 4. This is the first game by his new studio, Mohawk Games. I don't know how long he's been working on it. I think for a while.
A year and a half ago, I think it was announced.
And for an early access game, it's in a reasonable state of completeness. Like we've talked a couple of times about, like when an early access game kind of feels like the full game is there, but it just needs fleshing out. And this is kind of the point Offworld Trading Company is in. Like it feels like a full strategy game, but one that could use, another 6 months of stuff and balancing and polish. But the pitch for the game is it's an RTS that doesn't have any kind of direct combat at all. You control a kind of like corporate conglomerate exploiting the resources of Mars, and your rivals are all other corporations. And the goal of the strategy game, depending on which mode you're playing, but the most common way of playing it is to just buy out your opponents, and you win by amassing enough resources to buy them and their stuff until you're the only monopoly left on Mars.
How does that work? Because I don't actually understand hostile takeovers in real life. So why can you buy them? Is there...
So the game works in the first case because everything in the game exists as part of a simulated economy, which is not how most RTSs work. All RTSs are about resources and how, ultimately it's like other RTSs in that if you have more money than the other guy, you'll probably win. Yeah. But rather than turning that money into tanks, you turn that money into resources and stocks, basically. So every player has a share price, and if you purchase, I think it's 10 shares. Each block of shares represents 10% of their company. I think it's 10%, and that costs a certain amount of money. And if you buy out all of them, including any shares bought by other players, including shares bought in their own company by that player themselves, you own their company and that player's given a big step kicked out of the game. That share price is based on debt. And so when you begin the game, you start off with a certain amount of money. And there are loads of resources in the game, like from minerals like carbon, iron, aluminium, silicon, to water, oxygen, fuel, and then things that are combinations of those minerals like electronics and chemicals, and all. There's loads of them, and they're always on a panel on the left-hand side. And that panel lists the rate at which you're acquiring them or not acquiring them, and how much they're currently worth on the market. And that again is a fluid value based on the behaviour of players. Things go up and down in price based on how many are being bought and sold. And for reasons I explained in a sec, you basically are never ever going to be able to. Well, it's hard to become self-sufficient, and if you become self-sufficient, you will probably be giving up something else strategically in terms of your advantages potentially. So there will always be something you're going to have to buy rather than gather for yourself from the map. So that might be you get amazing mineral production, but you basically rely on buying food from the market and that's the game you're playing. That's the strategy, and your opponents can exploit that. But the money you spend on stuff that you're buying automatically just to keep going doesn't come out from your regular cash reserves. It goes into a mounting credit card debt. And when that debt gets very, very high, your stock price starts to crash. But you can also put your money into paying off your debt, which makes your stock price go back up. So, the kind of, the way you attack somebody, really attack, quote unquote, is by maneuvering them into a position where they rack up a huge amount of debt to push them into the range where you can buy them out. Alternatively, you can simply get such a huge money advantage yourself, it doesn't matter how much they're worth, you just buy them. So that is kind of where the tension comes in. And so the other reason that it works is that the map is always randomly generated. And it wouldn't work if that wasn't the case, because there is pretty much always a best solution to a map. But the point is you're trying to figure it out ahead of like 4 other players who are also trying to figure it out on a map that's pulled together randomly. And so when the game begins, you're looking down on a map that has very little of it revealed, most of it's fog of war, and your base hasn't been planted yet, and you haven't even chosen a faction yet. And you can ping the map, and you have like a limited number of pings, and you can scan it for resources. And I think you find out what other players are doing as well as they scan it, but you don't see what they see. As far as I can tell, this part's kind of confusing. And your scans regenerate, so you don't have to place your base straight away. You can keep scanning to try and find the ideal place to put your base. So there's a sort of risk-reward of waiting longer or putting something down straight away. And then, so as you scan, you'll understand more about what kind of map you've got. And that will affect massively how you choose to play. So, a really basic example is if you scan the map and it's kind of resource rich, but there's like no water whatsoever anywhere, then a really good idea is to go as the robotic faction, because the robotic faction, the idea is their factories are all automated, they have no human personnel on the ground, so they don't need water at all, pretty much. And then you can take advantage, you can just let the other players scrabble for what water's available, or maybe better, take it for yourself even though you don't need it, and sit on it, basically. Alternatively, there might be loads of water in the map, so the robotic faction isn't such a good idea, or maybe there's another way of making it work for you, or something like that, and then the other factions, there's 4 of them, and they all work in different ways, and use different resources in slightly in different proportions. And then what you do is you have, kind of straightforward, you get a certain amount of plots, and you can build buildings on those plots using the resources you begin with. And that can be anything from electricity generators to mineral extractors to factories that combine those minerals. There's a proportion that works for you, and you'll kind of figure that out over time. And then you can also, every now and then auctions start, which are kind of randomly generated events. The game pauses and every player bids on whatever the game has thrown out is now available. And the most common is like a new plot, so you can add an extra building, and players will like race each other to rack up, and that money comes from your debt as well. So there's this sort of strategic eBay thing of like, I don't want this, but I'm going to gamble on someone else wanting it more, so I'm going to
drive up the price.
Yeah, so they have to take it. And sometimes you just end up with it, and it's like, well, I'm going to have to make this really work for me now because I spent loads of money on it. And then there's the black market, which opens at intervals. One of the factions get access to the black market more often, but the black market opens, I think every couple of minutes, and it's essentially a market for special powers that you can use once. They're all like one-shot powers that you can use against other players or to help yourself, and each of them goes up in price as players use them. So there's an incentive to get them while they're cheap. And the most basic is just like a new plot of land. Pay a premium to get a new plot of land to expand your base. And then there's a simple one which is just like a goon squad that defends any of your chosen tiles against aggressive actions. But the rest are all more complicated. It's like an underground nuke that lowers the value of a resource tile by a certain amount by basically irradiating part of the groundwater or the iron that's down there. You can sabotage enemy buildings. You can create there's these chain power surges that go through linked buildings and disable all the buildings that are connected to each other. And because there's no direct ground attack, the notion of territory is slightly different to another RTS's. You can all happily pile all of your own, every player on the map can have an extractor next to each other on the same resource pile because you all want it. And it's all kind of fun and games until someone power surges the entire lot. Because maybe they don't need it anymore, so they get rid of it for everybody for a bit. And then there's a mutiny tile that temporarily flips someone else's building to work for you.
I love the idea that, in any other game, a nuke would be a thing that you fire at the enemy to destroy them. In this game, it's well, we can't do that, so we're going to set off underground to slightly devalue your land. That's what we're going to do with our nuclear weapon.
Yeah, and there's there's loads of, and there's occasionally pirates that can be bought out because travel time is something to consider. If you have a resource extractor that's miles from your base, you have to wait for the flying space truck to deliver the stuff to your base. So that's part of positioning at the beginning of the game as well. Being right next to some resources massively speeds up how fast you get them just because of the travel time. And then finally there are upgrade buildings that still take up plots of land, so you build them at the expense of extractors, factories, that kind of thing, but give you special powers. So one of them is the entertainment lounge, which entertains workers, and it just generates money constantly. It's a really simple one. Another one is a patent development facility, where you develop basically special passive bonuses, like teleportation, which allows you to forego travel time completely, or the ability to run all your buildings on water, which cuts down your power costs or increases your power costs or whatever. there's the hacking facility that allows you to hack the market. You can pay money to create false surpluses or shortages. Awesome. And so you have loads of something and it's worthless. You can pay some hackers to turn it into a shortage, sell it all off. Alternatively, you can use that to undermine, like, I don't know, one of your opponents is making loads of money on electronics. You crash the price of electronics and buy it all up.
Apparently, it lets you do things like at the end of Trading Places, the film with Dan Aykroyd, not blacking out like he does in that film, but the thing where they create a fake shortage of orange juice in order to get a bunch of money and screw over their opponents.
Yeah,
you can totally do that apparently.
And then
sorry to interrupt. It sounds really board gamey. Like, I guess particularly for the fact that it's not combat based and it's giving you reasons to negotiate with opponents. Like, that's not a thing that comes up in strategy multiplayer games a lot. And the auction thing you mentioned, of that coming up and trying to drive up the price for an opponent you know needs something, that exact mechanic, I'm pretty sure is in a board game called Panic on Wall Street, which does a bunch of the similar things.
You don't seem to, like, so the two things I would say that are unlike a board game, because I do think it's a good comparison. One is the randomly generated map, and because it's randomly generated to quite a sufficient amount of detail, that you could do that in a board game, but it would be a pain in the arse. Whereas, this is kind of breezy. It allows the game to have like a daily challenge, like it has a Spelunky style daily challenge, which is just a one-off seed of Mars, where it's like, deal with it. Like today, I played it today, and it was just fucking silicon for miles. Like, so glass was really easy to make, but everything else was a pain in the arse. The other thing is that you don't really interact with your opponents. Like, their business dealings are kind of opaque to you. Like, you can see all their buildings, so you can kind of tell what they're doing by looking at their buildings, but how much money they have at any given point isn't really available to you. And you also never make direct deals with them. Like, admittedly, I've been playing as bots, and I've been, learning the game against bots. But, like, you don't really form alliances or kind of, like, make one-on-one deals with players. You're all basically throwing into the same pool, ultimately. Like, the final ultimate building you build, like, the kind of endgame, like, a bit like how the game's version of a nuke is this underground nuke. Really, its version of a nuke, like the big late game rocket launcher you build to end the game, is a rocket launcher. It's an orbital trading rocket, and it allows you to sell every resource in the game has a local price and an off-world price. And sometimes it's better to sell it locally. People want it more locally than they do want it in space. But like oxygen sells really well in space. Who knew? So
I just got a hankering for some oxygen tonight. I don't know why. It's really in vogue.
It's a craze like yo-yos in the 90s. So you just put a load of oxygen in a rocket and shoot it into space and get loads of money. And so that's kind of like sort of endgame scenario. And I really like it. And it's very addictive. Like, a game fits into about 20 minutes and it sort of feels like you kind of have a satisfying kind of experience with it. However, it's very opaque. And I think it's opaque. And the one thing it made me think about is tradition, because it's actually quite a lot like a traditional RTS in a lot of ways. Like, it has the same sort of feeling when you know your build order's gone slightly wrong and you're probably fucked. It has the same feeling when you're obviously overpowered and you got to like the last part of the game and you can basically win whenever you want. So you start to kind of shuffle things around because you don't want to end straight away. Like, it's that feeling at the end of a StarCraft game or whatever where it's like, no one can beat me. Like, I've crippled their economies and I've got this huge army and all I really need to do is right click on them to win. But I'm going to do something else for a bit. It has exact thing. Like, there's moments where you've got so much money that you can click the buy share button 3 times for every opponent and you've just won. And that can feel anticlimactic in the same way it can in StarCraft, where you want the narrative to end in some kind of, climactic battle where everyone has an even stake in it. Whereas more often it ends with just like, I'm boned, or I've won. And that's not a problem that's unique to it. It's just RTSs are like that.
So I spoke to Soren Johnson and the art director Doreen Newcomb at GDC, and they said that was a really common bit of feedback that they've had on the forums, is that people feel like it ends too suddenly, that they're just playing along in the game and just like, look, I've just been bought, and that's it. And how as you play it more, you start to recognise the signs of that might be about to happen. But their answer to it basically is that they're adding other victory conditions, they're adding other game modes with different victory conditions, so that you can have a mode which is based on like a victory point system or something like that, to try and create endings which don't feel anticlimactic. Because they say they personally like the way it is now, but they recognise that other people don't.
I mean, it's not a question of not liking, it's just kind of interesting that it's inherited that weird tonal problem from a game that it's otherwise not a lot like. The other thing is that in a traditional RTS, armies or tanks or whatever are a really easy analog for power that you can kind of understand at a glance. And in Offworld, it's actually quite hard to tell how well an opponent's doing. You have their share price, you have their behaviour. So if they're, buying up loads of auctions willy-nilly, they are buying out shares in the other players, you can probably tell they're doing well. They've got a lot of cash to splash around. It's very hard, and maybe this is just me being new at it, but it's very hard to look at an opponent and go, I have a shot, or I don't have a shot. Whereas in a traditional RTS, you normally can do that. You send a scouting plane over in Supreme Commander or something, you look at their army and you go, I can probably still do this, or I probably can't. Like, I had a game earlier where I thought I pulled it back, like my share price was equal with the guy who was winning. He'd bought a bunch of shares in me, but I bought out all the rest, so I thought, like, I think I've priced him out of the game for now, right? I've got a time to kind of come back into it. And I started buying shares in the third player to try and, like, even the balance a bit by buying them out. Paid off all my debt, stuff's producing. I had a particular strategy in that game that was based around just producing goods and selling them rather than going for any tricks. And I thought I'd done everything strategically right to stay in the game, even though I knew I was at a disadvantage. And then, just got bought out. And I hadn't really know I was seeing it coming. And that's because there isn't that equivalent to a regular RTS where you can go,
they've got a lot of tanks.
I'm done. I'm doomed. You know what I mean? Like, it's the equivalent of, like, I don't know, him. If I'd known he had that army, I could have just hit the surrender button because I'd known I'd lost. Whereas
maybe the currency should be gold tanks. They can't attack, but they just kind of sit outside your base.
It's like,
he's got a lot of gold tanks.
No one trusts the banking industry nowadays. People should be buying bullion. They should be forging that bullion into tanks. The bank guy, just like, all my assets are in bullion tanks. That'd be good. But no, it doesn't work that way, unfortunately. So yeah, but so that's
if you're in like a 8-player game and you have enough to like buy out player 2 and you buy them out, do you get all their stuff?
Yes, you get all of their buildings, you get their assets, you get their lots.
I guess you'd be broke in terms of money.
You might be, depends how much you had to pay for them. But you tend to get like an exponential, like you pay off all that money, you maybe incur a lot of debt, you pick up their debt, but you quite rapidly, like, because you have access to vastly more territory than other players, like, especially if you've made the right purchasing decision, it's usually a massively, it's actually a bigger deal wiping out a player in Offworld than it is in other RTSs, because in another RTS you might kill them, you might be able to, like, get the remaining resources from their mineral line or something, but it's not like you've just become them.
Yeah.
Whereas in this, it's like you gain all of their resources, and maybe you've got more to handle, or more debt, or more, the costs of running everything go up. But chances are, if they weren't playing terribly, if they were running a decent base, then it will kind of balance out with a little bit of work, and then your profit-making potential just skyrockets. Because, that's where you snowball, where it's just like, well, everyone else is fucked now. Like, I had one where built 2 orbital rockets, bought someone with 3 orbital rockets, so I had 5. And then that gave me so much money, I just paid through the nose for mutinies, so I controlled everyone else's orbital rockets as well. So everyone was launching their orbital rockets, but they were all paying to me. So there was just 8 rockets going up at a time, and I was just fucking rolling in it. And then it was just, the kind of, if that had been against human players, I can imagine just rage quitting at that point, because it's just like, you've worked this entire game to get this trading network up, and now it's just paying dividends to me, and I'm just going to buy you, and I'm prolonging the game because I like watching the rockets.
That's my favourite point in any strategy game.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the point where I've already won, and it's like, alright, I'm just going to build lots of walls around my base and put like nice, neat Tesla coils every 4 grid squares. And
in single player RTSs, they do that all the time. And I remember being surprised when I first learned about competitive RTSs, and particularly StarCraft, and seeing. I think, to be honest, StarCraft 2 was probably the first competitive RTS I ever watched play. Maybe Source and Command & Conquer. But this idea of surrendering was completely alien to me, and the idea that, like, it's not even when, you're down to 1 peon, or you've lost all your peons in a town hall and you've only got 1 orc left, and you'd surrender then. But, like, in StarCraft, people surrender. I mean, there's a StarCraft player, Idro, who's famous for surrendering when he's, like, might win. Like, he has a really good chance of winning, but just doesn't want to play the game anymore. And even the best players, surrender when there's not 0 chance they would win. If they actually wanted to maximise their chances of winning, they would carry on playing to the death, but there's kind of like a politeness thing. And so, I wonder if that'll evolve in Offworld as well, like, just people realising, like, oh, they're just toying with me now. I'm going to quit this game.
I think I think the transparency, sort of the lack of transparency, helps and hurts with that, because one of the things, like, so honestly, I don't think I needed to go and look at Steam guides to learn the game. Like, it probably will get some kind of tutorial or something to kind of explain it, but there really are, like, best practice things you learn to do in terms of proportions and, like, how you use your plots and, like, when, you know, and obviously that's a metagame and that will shift as people find new and better ways to play it and the balance of the game shifts around. But, like, in terms of when it's a good idea to invest in minerals and when it's a good idea to invest in just the things you need to keep your base ticking over, like food and power, that stuff seems fairly sort of like, it's not that it's unintuitive, it's just that the best way to do it occurs to you when someone tells you how to do that, and that means a certain amount of learning outside the game, because that stuff isn't necessarily like, you know, because you're given access to basically everything you want to build in the game straight away, only limited by space and the amount of lots you have to plant. There's none of that kind of natural tech tree progression that you get in an RTS that sort of tells you, well, this is kind of the way my strategy should evolve based on the decisions I've already made. You kind of can make any decision at any time, more or less, with the only exception being the big endgame buildings. So, until you've played it a few times or read a few guides, it's kind of impossible to make the right decisions, or to make perfect decisions. And it seems to be that the game kind of, for me at least, the game comes into its own when you have that understanding. So, like, you know, when I first started playing, I had no idea how important glass was. Like, glass just seemed like something like one of other resources. Why is glass more important than chemicals? Why is it more important than electronics? But glass is used in almost everything, especially like orbital rocket launchers, because you loads of glass in those things, just full of glass. So having like, and also actually, no, hang on, it's not used in the endgame, but it's used so much for upgrading that it's like if you don't have your own source of glass production, you're just going to get absolutely fucked by the market, because whoever produces it is going to get such a huge advantage for selling it off. That, you know, every guide you read is like, you know, make sure you can do glass fairly soon, because otherwise, you know, there's very few circumstances where that's not going to be a good thing for you, even late game. And so at the moment, there are things like that where when you know them, that becomes interesting, because you can plan your strategy around it, where you go like, oh, there's no silicon on this map. I don't need it straight away, but I'm going to make sure I'm the first person to get the silicon, because eventually everybody's going to want it. And that's when it becomes cool, because you can anticipate the way the market's going to go, and when you're right, it feels really good. But I think the game needs to do a little bit of a better job at the moment to kind of explain what's going to be valuable and when. Like, the chemicals are only really used to research patents. And so you might think, chemicals, that's not complicated. I'm going to make chemicals, and no one wants it, because no one's really doing that.
I wonder how that changes when you play against other human beings, whether there's, you know, metagame stuff where, you know, glass becomes OP, but then the market adjusts and the metagame adjusts, and
that's true actually. Like I haven't played against humans. I really like to, because there's because I imagine the players would go in knowing that kind of thing, and so maybe the price of glass would be really low because every player's building it. So not having a glass production facility would become legit because all the other players are pumping it out and selling it on the market and they're crashing the price.
It's whether it's because it's an economy, whether it's kind of self-balancing in the way that other strategy games aren't.
Yeah, I mean, that would be the hope, I think. And it does, like, it is really gratifying to, like, I mean, it's promising already the amount of different strategies that seem to be viable. Like, one of the things I quite like doing is being, like, mega sensible and, like, building quite a self-sufficient base that doesn't produce a huge amount, but doesn't really cost anything to run. I'm paying off my debt really early and then just selling goods. And not over-investing in like crazy schemes and not going for the hacking or the kind of upgrades and stuff, but having a share price no one else can touch because I don't have any debt. And eventually sort of snowballing to the point where I can buy someone who's bankrupted themselves building all the cool buildings I then want. Like that feels like a kind of nice way of taking advantage of another player. And it's risky in that ultimately if I fail at that, then I'm sat there at the end game just like, anyone want to buy steel?
Just like a mom and pop operation.
Yeah, exactly. Lemonade stand, corner shop thing. But yeah, so it's got huge amounts of potential. The other thing I really like about it at the moment that they're definitely going to change is at the moment it's got all placeholder VO. Like it will have like voiceover for the different factions, and they say things so like, you know, when pirates appear, it's like, pirates, I hate those filthy bandits, or you know, mess with us and, you know, screw with us and we'll screw with you if you sabotage someone's stuff or whatever. But at the moment they've all been read out by those like screen reader software. Like, you know, you get like, you know, you can pick a different voice and they, you know, the computer will be like, hello, I'm talking in a computer voice. And all of it's done like that, and it makes the entire game feel like it's being conducted by really chill robots. Because, there's a male voice and female voice and different accents for different factions. But it is just like, screw with us, and we will screw with you. And they never really sound particularly cross about it, and given that the things you're doing to each other are really shitty, I really like that.
They should keep that as an option even when the record properly.
Just like, I like this. I don't want it to feel like Wolf of Wall Street. Everyone is chill robots all the time.
Their equivalent of the kind of GG surrendering should be that you should be able to build a structure which is like your legal department, and if you recognise that you've just lost and you're fucked, if you've built this, what should be a quite expensive little building, you should be able to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. And that just takes you out of the game, but it prevents anyone else from being able to buy your stuff.
Yeah.
So if someone's just fucked you over and you want to spite that person with your last move, you can surrender if you've spent the money in order to get this building by surrendering and stopping them from being able to actually buy you out and get all your goods.
That's really cool. One of the things they do in Galciv, a lot of what you're saying about Offworld actually reminds me of Galciv, just because, not because that game is economy focused, but just because it has everything in it. So it has economy in it, and it has lots of these financial relationships and things. And when you can't really buy anyone out, but one thing that does happen is you sometimes just inherit someone's empire, because when someone decides to surrender, and they almost always surrender rather than being completely defeated, if it's the AI, then they choose who to give their empire to, and so they usually give it to someone who's been nice to them rather than their mortal foe, because there's 15 races or whatever. And so one time I had a very small empire, and I'd been really, really punching above my weight, attacking everybody and starting loads of fights. And then there was this race that had massively expanded all over the galaxy, and they were at war with one of my enemies, and the only reason they liked me was because I had also picked a fight with these aggressive, powerful jerks. And so when they were finally defeated by the aggressive, powerful jerks, instead of losing all their planets to the aggressive, powerful jerks, they gave them all to me. And there was a point when they were they still had a lot of fucking planets. And the first effect of that, you're talking about when you buy someone out, you might get an empire that's kind of takes a bit of work to make it actually work for you. My economy just completely crashed because their civilization was just rubbish. They had 35 planets or something, and all of them were in massive amounts of debt and just making a loss every turn. What the fuck? I didn't ask for this. And
you deal with it.
It looked like a terrible thing, but then I realised, for the most part in that game, your individual planets going to have to pay for themselves, and if you have one that's making a loss, it's bad. But the only thing that is spread across all of your planets, where they all benefit each other and benefit you, is research. And I realised, I've just got so many fucking worlds now that I can just research anything. I'm just the technological leader of the galaxy. And so I ended up researching a research victory and just raced down that path much faster than anyone else could.
That's awesome.
It kind of does need... It needs something, I think, just to kind of give players who are behind a more transparent route back in, or a way of changing tack in a way that might help, because at the moment everything's about money, and so you can get priced out of the black market as much as you can get priced out of everything else, and it feels like the black market is there to be your
kind of pressure valve.
Yeah, it's your way of and maybe that is what happened to me in that last game, because I had my 3 power units were clustered together, because you get a bonus having things adjacent tiles, but if they're clustered together, they're also vulnerable to black market attacks that hit everything. And so, eventually, I think one of the reasons I lost is because all of the opponents seem to be spending all of their black market money EMPing my power supply constantly, so they're just switching off my power constantly, and I spend loads of money on electricity from the market. And that felt shitty to happen to me, but it also priced me out of doing anything to them, because I had no money. And, I had to sacrifice a crashing share price or dumping money on the black market to try and effectively target them, and that felt like a kind of lose-lose scenario. But maybe that's a bots thing. Maybe humans wouldn't be that kind of perfectly efficient at fucking you.
Mm. It sounds like a lot of the appeal of it, the fact that it's 20 minutes games, and the fact that it's basically base building, and the aggression part of it is secondary and it's not direct conflict. It sounds like they sort of made a game about the part that a lot of people like about RTSs, which is I just want to build a nice base. I just want to do that. I think maybe the competitive RTS I really want is you all just build a base, you can't interact with each other at all, and then judges come along and rate your base. They just hold up scorecards like 10, 9.
Like changing rooms.
Lovely farms.
Yeah, I mean, the bases are pretty abstract because it's just little hexes, and it's like 3 or 4 buildings, and like you get the impression that your home base is supposed to be like a whole city, but it is just like little squares. Like it is very, very abstract. There's kind of some goofy and kind of charming animations, like when you claim a distant resource tile, and you're going to send an iron mine over it and build an iron extractor on the other side of the planet. It physically takes off from your base and flies over there like a mine. Like if a whole drill bit will just take off and start flying across the planet towards where it's going. And if an enemy flying mine gets there before yours just sort of goes like, oh well, and then vanishes.
Here I am.
Yeah, and then disappears, and you get the plot back, and you have to send one somewhere else. So one of the things that becomes competitive, that's one of the advantages to placing your starter base right next to whatever mineral you really want is. It takes less time for your buildings to physically fly there, because the physical flight time of like an entire, if you want to build a wind farm on a mountain, there'll just be a lot of wind farms like flying through the sky. Like the one that happens a lot is geothermal vents, because maps don't always generate with geothermal vents, and if they do, they're the best source of power if you can keep hold of them. And so at a certain point in the game, you'll just see like geothermal plants take off from loads of different bases and start racing each other.
Can you mine block, like if there's a mine that you know where it's headed to and you are closer to it, can you launch your mine and get there and land on it first, just specifically to stop that guy from getting it and then take off again?
No, you can't move them once they've landed.
Okay.
You use the plot then, so you can't just like dick about flying mines around. Yeah, no, it's not really like that. It doesn't really have any micro like that at all in it, really. But I thought that was kind of funny. What have you been playing, Tom?
I've been playing Ori and the Blind Forest, which Marsh raved about 2 podcasts ago, and it's a very beautiful side-on platformer where you play a tiny, friendly forest spirit armed with homing missiles for some reason. That's just your default interaction with the world, is to fire a swarm of homing missiles that slam into any living thing and obliterate it. And so by doing this, you make peace with the forest and progress through your enlightenment. It's really, really pretty. The animation is, we mentioned before, it's by James Benson, who is the animator on Firewatch as well. And the animation in particular is really, really good. And it has a very nice feel to the movement, the jumping around. Your character kind of, as well as it just being kind of well tuned in terms of acceleration, deceleration, and how far you go and stuff. Your character kind of really fluidly moves between the different interactions and wall jumping and double jumping and doing little somersaults in the air and sliding as they land. And that's all really cool. It's got a very charming intro. And the basic, it's a bit of a tough sell for me because it's a Metroidvania game, which means that you're in a series of, it'd be wrong to call it open world really, because it's kind of like a series of corridors and platforms that you jump between and, a sort of network of caves, really. And the Metroidvania thing means that you keep coming up against barriers that you don't know how to get past, and then later on you get a new ability that lets you get past those barriers. And there's one that's there's blue doors, and you can't open any blue doors until you get the special charge attack ability, and then once you do that, that will always destroy a blue door, and from then on you can get through blue doors. So when you come up against something that you don't know how to open, I've never played Metroid and never played Castlevania, so Metroidvania is a kind of, that's all I know about it, is that it generally involves these weird barriers that you don't know whether you can open them or not. And sometimes, the problem with it, it's not a massive problem with the game, but every game of this kind, including the Batman Arkham games, has presented me with a situation where I'm trying to solve a puzzle and halfway through I think, shit, maybe this just isn't a puzzle, maybe I just can't do this because I don't have the right tool. And there's just no clear way of telling that. And Ori is generally really good at that. Like the blue doors, I just assumed everything was a gate, and I couldn't open the gate till I had the right tool. And so all the blue doors, I ignored them until I got the blue power-up ability, and then I could open them all. But then later, there's pink doors, and so I'm like, okay, I can't open these till I get the pink ability, and then I hit a dead end, and I went a different way and hit another dead end. It's a big, sprawling network of corridors. There's loads of different ways you could go. And you're always walking past other routes that you could have taken. So when you do hit dead end, you've got to go way, way back to where you last saw a route that you could have taken. And I did that a lot. And then I think just by luck, I ended up discovering the key to open the pink doors. And it's not, you have to unlock a pink ability. There's a logic to it, and it's not a bad logic. But just because it's a Metroidvania, I just gave up on the puzzle when I couldn't see an obvious way to open the pink door. And there's a way to open the pink doors that doesn't involve getting any new special abilities, doesn't involve anything that you can't do from the start of the game. But maybe not all of them. Maybe some of the ones I passed you can't open this way because it involves something special in the environment. So it's like, that's irritating slightly. So I was saying it has like an uphill struggle with me because I'm not a massive platformer fan anyway. Like, even though this does movement and jumping really, really nicely and is beautifully animated, it still doesn't. Jumping around is not inherently pleasurable for me. It's the nicest version of that I played in a while, but it's still, if all the game was jumping on platforms, I would not play it. I also don't really like challenge. I don't like a lot of the basic ingredients of video games.
Jumping and challenges.
Yeah, those are the two things I really hate. I also hate boss fights, and it's quite a skill-based thing. There's tricky jumps in it. There's jumps where I thought, oh, you just can't make this till you get, again, the Metroidvania thing bites it in the ass, because I think, oh, I just need to get unlocked double jumps to do this. And it turns out, no, you can do it, you just have to get the jump really, really right. It'll be close. And there are some that are impossible, but they're close. And there are some that are close, and you don't have to do them, but you can do them, because there's some secret special reward at the end of it. So it's optional, so it doesn't matter that you find it impossible or whatever. But there's lots of things on that borderline that fudge that issue. And I really hate jumping puzzles in general. Almost every time I die in Ori from something other than an enemy, it's very, very frustrating. And sometimes that's fine, and sometimes it's not. And that's the biggest problem I have with the game is the fact that there is that massive variance, and the designers of the game have no idea whether a particular death is going to set me back ages or it's going to set me back 3 seconds, because you control the checkpoints. So you collect these blue plants, and each blue plant gives you one blue energy orb, and those energy orbs can either be spent on that special attack that opens the blue doors, or you can use them to create a save point. And if you don't create any save points, then there are some story checkpoints, but they are hours apart. So it's completely impractical not to use them. You have to basically place your own checkpoints. And that's really, really bad.
There are resource you can run out of,
yeah.
Right?
And there's so many things that are slightly... It seems like not that bad a system at first, because I'm like, well, I guess I'd rather place my own checkpoints than be stuck with whatever the designers gave me. But then the designers don't design levels as if you might have a checkpoint 10 minutes back or 30 seconds back. They design the levels as if they've placed a checkpoint at the start of this area, and they don't mind completely fucking you over in a way you couldn't possibly predict. And yeah, there's loads of little things wrong with it. So one is that, I mean, one time I defeated this big jellyfish enemy, or big giant blob, that when you killed it, it splits into tinier blobs, and each one of those splits into smaller ones, and so on and so on. It takes a long time to kill it. And I finally killed it, and I'm like, yes, I'm going to save and create a checkpoint there. And then I went a bit further, I died, respawned my checkpoint, and it respawns the enemy on the checkpoint. So there's a giant, mini boss virtually on my checkpoint. Every time I die and go back there, I'm going to have to destroy this thing. And even if I can do it without taking damage, it's a long fight. It's a real pain in the ass. So that's annoying. And there's all of the little inconsistencies as to how respawning works and saving and loading works are all against you, basically. So enemies respawn, but those blue plants that give you the energy balls that let you make these save points don't respawn. So it's like everything except those will regenerate. So now you've got to kill all the enemies again, but then you don't get an extra save point thing that you can use again. And in loads of ways, like when you go back to that checkpoint, it'll give you the health that you had then, and it'll give you the blue orbs that you had then. And so I had an upgrade. You also level up, and you spend ability points to go down these different ability trees. And there's one that said, in frustratingly vague terms, this one lets you see almost all collectibles or pickups on the map. And I'm like, well, all I care about is these blue orbs because they control the save system, and I'm just, as with almost any game that does inventive save system, I'm spending 100% of my time thinking about the save system. None on the game at all. I'm just always thinking about where are the blue orbs. I need the blue orbs, so I've got to be able to save, because I'm going to be so fucking pissed off if I lose my progress now. So I'm like, okay, it's worth spending an ability point on this just to know where the blue orbs are, so that I'm probably missing some, and then I'd have more blue orbs. In general, I'd be able to save more often, and this would be less of a problem for me. And I got this ability, and also I created a save point first. So I'm like, okay, create a save point. All my stats are restored when I go back to these. Then I spent the ability point on the thing, checked the map, doesn't show blue orbs. All it shows is I can't remember what it shows, but it showed things that all of them were totally uninteresting to me. And so I'm like, okay, I load the old save game. And we load the old save game, you've still spent the ability point. All your other stats are reversed, but not the experience in the scroll box. So it's just like, every time it's inconsistent. It's always against me. And that thing about not knowing where, leaving it in my hands as to where to place the checkpoint, which, like I say, initially appealed to me, in practice just is always a problem, because it just means, if I can save freely, the question I ask myself is, okay, after I've done a certain challenge, if I remember, which is, in order to remember, you'll have to shatter the immersion of the game and remember, I'm playing a video game, I'm not really this person, I'm not really in this challenge, I'm not really living this experience, I need to remember, this is a video game and I should save, which I don't like in the first place. And then I also, if I can save freely, then I think, okay, my criteria for should I save or not is, would I be annoyed if I lost that progress to have to do that last bit again? And the answer to that is yes, almost always. And so in Ori, I think that, and I think, yes, I would be annoyed if I lost that, and I think, but I've only got one left. And this next bit I'm going to do also looks difficult, and after I've done that, I certainly won't want to lose that progress. And I can see there's no blue plant beyond these crushy platform things that I'm going to have to get through. So now I've got to gamble about, do I want to risk the frustration of redoing the last bit versus the frustration of potentially having to redo both bits if I get through this other one and then die to something else after that. And some of the challenges are just, mostly it's not too brutally difficult a game as far as I played. I played about 3 or 4 hours. But one of the last bits I got to is a special area where to progress you have to go through a hole in the wall on the left-hand side of the screen, and then you pop out a hole in the wall on the right-hand side of the screen. But it's not actually screen wrapping, it's just by the designer's whim as to which hole you come out of. So you go to the left and you might come out the top, or you go to the left and you might come out the bottom. And some of those lead directly to spikes that instantly kill you. And so that's just fucking bullshit. And I've died so many times in that area. That's where I am right now, actually. I've kind of given up, because I'm just like, I've run out of save points, so every time now I have to just do this. Every time I die to this bullshit stuff, I'm having to redo loads of really tedious jumping puzzles. And so I might be just done with it.
You've played much more of it than I have, but I had the same thing with the save system. Although it sounds like you're approaching it from the example of saving after you've just completed a challenge, whereas my thing is always, I come to a challenge, do I save now? Because I'm gambling on what do I think my chances are of completing this first time without dying. And what that creates is, if I think, no, I'm going to use one of my blue orbs and I'm going to save here, and then I successfully complete the challenge, I don't feel happy that I completed the challenge. I feel regret that I wasted one of my blue orbs. I'm just like,
Which saps the joy out of the one pleasurable thing that you can do.
How did you feel about the intro? Because it's beautifully animated, and it's sad, and it's heartfelt, and it's really lovely, and I really like it. But it doesn't feel like an introduction to the game that it then becomes.
Yeah.
It then becomes...
Then you get homing missiles.
Then you get homing missiles, and it's a quite hard kind of puzzle platformer, not quite Super Meat Boy, but in that kind of oeuvre. Whereas the introduction is like Finding Nemo or Up, it's tugging at your heartstrings, and it's beautifully animated. And there's 2 things with that. One is that the people I know who I think would really like the intro then wouldn't like the game that follows it. And the people who would like the game would kind of just be frustrated by the intro because they want to get on with the jumping over the spikes and the shooting the homing missiles. But at the same time, because of that disconnect between the 2 tones of the game, the sad, heartwarming, kind of awful bit at the beginning feels emotionally manipulative. Like, the game is... I don't know. Is it a spoiler? I referenced Finding Nemo and Up, and if you've seen either of those 2 films, you know the tone.
Now you might be spoiling this film for anyone who's played Ori.
The beginning is sad.
I think
the beginning will make you feel feels and tries very hard to try to make you cry, I think.
Does a sad thing happen to a nice thing?
Yes. And it's quite effective, but it's like, why do I need this? Why do I need this before the game about the homing missiles and the jumping over the spikes?
Yeah, but if I could change one of those things, I would change the game about the homing missiles and the spikes. I think. Well, it's hard to judge what the emotional impact of the trailer would have been in a normal experience, because we talked about the game on the podcast 2 weeks ago, and after the podcast, Marsh showed me and Tom Senior the intro, and Tom kind of played through the early section of the game, so I saw it when someone else was playing it. And also Marsh had just described it as emotionally manipulative. So the same phrase occurred to him.
It is, I mean, it's really well made, it's well told, that introduction, and although it's quite slow and you don't have any of your abilities yet, it's interactive only in as much as you're pushing left or right in order to steer your character, and you kind of walk slowly, but just that little bit of interaction does make a difference. And the way it kind of compacts a long period of time with these two characters down into like what's like a 10-minute little vignette is really lovely. But the rest of the game's about homing missiles and spikes. It's not
and even
really
I haven't been paying attention to the story, but part of the reason for that is it's the Jabba the Hutt voice going and lecturing me about stuff, and then it's like a little sprite voice going. Both of them are really irritating, and when I have read their text, it's been boring and had nothing to do with the intro story as far as I could see. I mean, there's vague stuff that could connect to it, but I was really invested in the story of Ori and the big lumbering dude thing. Is the lumbering dude thing, is that one of the voices I'm hearing?
I don't think so. Isn't one of the voices the Star Tree? Is it,
as far as I can tell, this
feels like it's called the Star Tree.
This blue thing I cared about is just not in it, and nothing in the game is about that. And so, yeah, I'm feeling the same kind of disconnect.
Do you remember when, like, in the 90s, there'd be, like, a game tie-in to a Disney movie, and like the Lion King game, where the Lion King game was a platformer that was hard as balls, which was about fundamentally spikes, if not homing missiles. And you would, it would attempt to recreate sequences from a film that has a very sad moment in it, but would do so in a way that was just distracting and hard as shit. And if you liked anything about that film, then the chances are you wouldn't like the Mega Drive game. Is this basically both of those things in the same game?
In
Quite possibly.
a sense, yes. I never played the Lion King game, but the Aladdin game was pretty good.
Yeah, that was pretty good.
Wasn't the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game brutally bastard hard?
Yeah. I was, I'm researching an article about the history of Star Wars games on the PC recently, which has been a revelation that has made me stop liking Star Wars and video games. The one key revelation from that is that anybody who, in the noughties, said, "Oh God, games are just brown now," had never played a video game before. As far as I can tell, games were always brown. And non-browner than every Star Wars game made in the 90s. But the main thing, was the amazing old Super Star Wars platform games they made on SNES, which didn't most of them didn't come out on PC, but plenty of ROMs available. But were the most amazing, egregious adaptations of that source material. Do you remember that bit in A New Hope where Luke Skywalker fights one giant scorpion that turns into lots of smaller scorpions as it's hit?
No.
I remember that moment from video games.
Yeah, indeed. Well, that happens.
I remember that moment from Ori and the Blind Forest.
All platformers used to be bastard hard. That's the thing. We talk about hard platformers now, like Super Meat Boy and Ori, and you want to be the guy and stuff like that. But just uniformly, old Mario games were really fucking difficult. But the film tie-ins as well. I had the Tim Burton Batman 1 film had a tie-in, Amiga 500.
Shit, I remember that.
Side-scrolling game, which was part platformer, part... I don't know, I vaguely remember, punching a criminal and he fell into a van and he turned into a Joker. He actually had
you were there, that's
origin story of it. Yeah. And then there was the Back to the Future 2 side-scrolling platform game as well, which alternated between Marty on foot and Marty on the hoverboard. And that was incredibly hard, encountering iterations of Biff's gang duff you up and stuff like that.
It's interesting, the notion that you should be able to complete a game that you start is not how things used to work. I maybe I put this down in the past as being a child that wasn't good at things. But, my experience of games when I was a kid was of the first level and a half of most games, because those are the bits I could actually do. Whereas, like, you know, is it like today where all this stuff comes back in the form of, like, I don't know, Bloodborne coming out, and people like, but, you know, is it too hard for most gamers? And it's like, well, 20 years ago, being able to do the first boss and not much more was most people's experience of almost everything.
I didn't realise this until like 3 years ago when I went back and I replayed a bunch of my favourite Amiga games. I emulated them. And all these games, which are kind of formative for me and I love, and some of them I would class in, you know, some of my favourite games of all time, and I would play them and I would reach the third level, then I would go, I've never seen this before. And I just hadn't realised there were so many games where it was like, I did not know that this game had this tile set. I didn't know what.
Yeah.
Because in my mind, I just thought, oh, I played that game for hundreds of hours without thinking about the fact that I never got past level 2. And then I would play them emulated, and I would get to like level 4 or 5, and I would get stuck. And I wouldn't be able to go any further, and I would be like, oh.
So you got a bit better. Not that much better.
I think I maybe just got more patient, but at the same time weirdly more keen for novelty. So like nowadays, if I got stuck on level 2 or thing, I'd be like, fuck this, never playing this ever again. Yeah. Whereas then it was like, I felt like every day for like 3 years.
I mean, back in, I don't know if it was the time period or my age, but probably mostly my age. I just didn't have a lot of video games to play, so like the ones I had were incredibly precious and exciting to me, and so I would, if they were brutally bastard hard on level 1, I'd still just beat my head against level 1, you know, until Christmas, when I would get some new video games. And so I was incredibly willing to put up with control problems and difficulty spikes and all that stuff. And also, it was, I think, about 1 in 3 games that I purchased flat out didn't work. It just didn't run. That was just like a buyer beware thing that you just had to deal with. This is like about a third of all games won't work on your computer. This was PC gaming, of course, so I didn't have a console back then. And so, yeah, it was like just random whether you had a certain MS-DOS incompatibility or your MIDI drivers didn't work or something. And so when something did work, I was sure as shit going to get every ounce of value I could out of it.
My education on that was the first computer my family ever owned. I think they got it the same year I was born. It was an Amstrad CPC 464, and it loaded cassettes. And it wasn't that a third of the games wouldn't work, it's that all games would only load about a third of the time. And so, like, SimCity, loading it in from a tape and a tape deck on the Amstrad, would take about 3 minutes to load, but 2 times out of 3 it would crash during the loading screen. And I would, you know, sit there and wait for 2 or 3 minutes would pass, and then I would wait 2 or 3 more minutes to check, okay, it hasn't worked this time. It's not just taking a long time, it's not worked. And I would turn it off, take the tape out, blow on it, put the tape back in, put the thing, and try again. And I would just do that, and it would take like 30 minutes to get games to work. And I was like, you know, at this point, I was like 4 trying to play these games. And I was like, I could never work out how to play SimCity. I liked placing down the buildings, but none of them ever had power because I don't understand how to draw power lines from whether that was even a thing. But I just like doing it. But I think I have infinite fucking patience now, basically, because this was my introduction to computer games.
I was thinking, because again, having spent today and yesterday going back through lots of videos of all the PC games, all Star Wars games, but it's, you know, there has always been Star Wars games, so it's kind of a decent cross-section. And part of it is like, a lot of it is obviously going, holy shit, I don't remember that looking that terrible. But I think games not running or running badly was like a big part of that, where you'd try the demo of a game and it wouldn't work very well, and you'd kind of like see the magic trick, and then you'd see it on like a friend's computer, or like, you know, when my family finally got like a decent PC for 1998. I remember because the graphics card we got came with the Half-Life Day 1 demo that was like that kind of weird slice of Half-Life 1.
Uplink. Half-Life Uplink? Which was like...
No, it's not Uplink. There was an exclusive build of Half-Life 1 that was called Half-Life 1 The First Day, I think. Huh. That was only released with like certain GeForce, early GeForce cards, I think. I can't remember precisely, but that was the thing. And like, that looked amazing, obviously, but then going back and like properly being able to play Dark Forces 2, which was then like, holy shit, this is mind-blowing. Or like Episode 1 Pod Racer on the PC, which previously, you know, like, I guess this is the years before my idiot child brain knew what frame rate was and why frame rate was important to games, and you get people now complaining that if something isn't 60 frames a second, it's obviously garbage and unfit for human consumption. But it really does make a difference to how you feel something looks when it's smooth. And so I think maybe that's, I don't know, part of the rose-tinted glasses isn't just not having anything to compare it with, but it's also this memory of suddenly games becoming not only 3D, but substantially smoother and substantially...
Yeah, I think it was Jedi Knight where I discovered that if I turned down the resolution to like 640 by 480, it suddenly ran at what was probably 30 FPS, but to me seemed astonishingly smooth. And the fact that it was so pixelated that I could barely make out what was going on, it was a real like dilemma. Is that better or worse? Because it's so smooth, and suddenly like all interactions feel so much more satisfying, and like lightsaber stuff and all that stuff. Do you remember playing Doom in a way back in the day? You couldn't change the resolution of a game; you just shrunk the window, and it wasn't running in windowed mode. It was full screen because you weren't even running in Windows. You're running it in DOS, and so they would just like, all the HUD would be the same size, but the actual viewing area of the game would just shrink, and there'd just be a border around it, like a little sort of tiled green marble border.
Oh god,
and
yeah.
so you just made the screen smaller and smaller until it ran smoothly. And like, you just had to move your face closer to the screen to see what was going on.
Things are much better now.
Yeah,
You can complete
totally.
games that you pay for, and most of the time they run okay.
And they cost like $10 something.
Yeah. That was the other thing, like anytime anyone complains about the price of games when they're like 35 quid most of the time on PC, like max, games for the Amiga used to regularly cost like 50, 60 pounds.
Yeah.
And most of them were shit.
Yeah.
Wouldn't work.
Shall we do questions from questions?
Yes.
Okay. Has anyone ever said no to that question?
End the podcast.
Always the first question from questions is questions from questions.
Shall we
The
even
answer-
bother?
Always yes. Tradition.
We love questions.
I like questions because, let's talk
Just
for a
trail
while.
off.
Why?
Let's go on, let's go on. So questions from where?
Because they usually invoke some kind of discussion, whereas our, like, what we should have been playing session sometimes,
Bit
involves
monologue-y.
just, we just have to talk for like 15 minutes about why I like this game, and no one can really chime in because they haven't played it.
I think that's helped by the fact that we take a break in between, and that break often stretches into like the 30-45 minute zone, during which the booze has time to suck in. So by the time we come back for questions, we're much more kind of chatty and bantering, rather than being
What you're
artificial.
hearing right now is the audio diary you would listen to in a game where you explored an unfinished version of this podcast, where its creators argued about the
We'd be
correct
floating
format.
eyeballs going around.
Yeah.
We just talked about Oreo cookies for 20 minutes, and now we've listened up.
Graham bought Oreo cookies, and they're the dark kind that, like, the filling isn't white, it's dark.
Yeah, I didn't realise that when I bought them.
They're Sith cookies.
Yeah, delicious.
Sith Oreos.
I'm slightly disappointed, except that they don't taste
They
any
taste
differently.
exactly the same.
I think it's maybe that's like because Oreo cookies taste chocolatey, and now they look chocolatey as well. Whereas previously there was a kind of X factor. Like, but what is this?
Frisson of
Yes.
excitement to
It's
it.
icing, but what is it? Like now it's more. No, this is a chocolate biscuit.
Little known fact about Oreo cookies is that they're vegan.
Really?
No dairy products or milk or anything of any kind.
My sister knows
They
that.
have soya.
Wow.
Really good. If you live with a
Genuinely
vegan.
interesting.
But you know what isn't vegan? An Oreo milkshake. But you know what's also excellent? An Oreo milkshake.
Oreo milkshakes are great, but soya milk is more delicious than regular milk.
It is. I'm lactose intolerant, so I only drink soy
Well,
milk.
there you go. And you get really
Almond.
great vegan dairy-free ice cream as well.
Yeah, Swedish glass is amazing.
Can really recommend almond milk actually if you're looking for an alternative to
This
dairy.
is the pro-vegan podcast.
Yeah,
So
it's great.
these Oreo cookies, which I bought and brought here, lovely, generous gift on my part.
Yeah.
But really, I bought it because we've got like a juicer at home. I'm going to go home and make Oreo cookie milkshakes
Nice.
with them.
Doing that with almond milkshake would be fucking delicious as shit, man.
Yeah, pretty good, pretty good. So, questions.
Okay, that's the hypothetical scenario. Who said no to questions from the internet? We would just talk
That's what
about
would happen
biscuits
for the
for
rest of
45 minutes.
And if you'd like to see us do that, vote now.
Patrick Anderson writes, Dear Crouton and Soup Bar, a while back I briefly worked for a gaming magazine. Commiserations. I got a job. I got the job through a work sample which I sent on whim, just being curious whether I had what it took. Because of 100 little reasons, I decided not to keep writing for them for more than a couple of months. Something I did find curious, however, was that most of the people writing for the magazine, including me, were not actually paid. Except for stuff I got in the mail sometimes, like pens, memory cards for digital cameras, and games for platforms I had explicitly said I did not own. And we were only expected to write on our spare time. Well, that sounds like a pretty good reason to decide to only work for them for a couple of months. But I've only had a quick and very superficial dip in the pool of games journalism, so therefore I am asking you veterans, is this business model, or whatever you would call it, of games journalism widespread? What effects do you think it could have on games journalism as a whole if it would become the standard? Should the chance of having your reviews and articles read by a larger audience be reward enough for your work? Keep up the great podcast. Best regards, Patrick.
No!
No, it's not reward enough. Money is rewarding.
Yeah, I don't know how widespread it is. I mean, you hear stories and stuff. I certainly would expect anybody who did work for me that got published to be paid for that work.
Certainly in magazines. You hear about websites which don't make a profit or don't make very much money at all, and they have volunteers, which they sometimes pay with free games, and that's iffy. But if a magazine is doing it for free, presumably the magazine is a thing that its readers are paying for.
Mm. There's a physical product that is sold for money.
Mm. So that seems like bullshit to me.
Does seem like bullshit to me. I mean, the broader point is about working for exposure, and I think I'm going to paraphrase Brendan Calwell, I think, who pointed out that people mostly just die of exposure rather than living off it. Which, yeah, it's not a real thing. This is not an age where your work will never reach an audience unless it has a medium-sized website attached to it. Work for money. If it's work, you should be paid for it. And if you're not being paid for it, you're devaluing the work of the act of writing, basically.
Did you guys ever do work experience?
No.
No.
We had to, it was part of our, just in high school, we had to do some,
I did it, but not in this industry.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I didn't mean in games industry, I meant just generally.
It was a 2-week thing that we had to do at secondary school, and I did not do it for some reason. I don't remember why.
Well done.
I just went to school for 2 weeks, and I was the only person in my year who was there, and everyone else was like, "Oh, what are you doing? This is so important for your CV!" And I was like, "I don't know. Why? What?"
I think that was the thing. Certainly I wasn't paid. I don't think people generally get paid for that.
No.
And it's a really useful thing, and you learn a bunch about how to do that job. And usually the work you're doing is not something that is making money for the person you're working for. Usually you're a massive burden to them and you're just fucking everything up, and they take some of the time out of their day to teach you how to do that job, and then afterwards you have a bunch of skills that you didn't have before and loads more knowledge, and they have basically some lost time. And in that case I think it's fine to not get paid. That's the case where it's
I mean, I changed the way we did that at Gamer, so that if someone came in for work experience, we couldn't necessarily pay them for their time, but if they produced something that was subsequently publishable, we would pay them for that as we would pay any other freelance contributor, which I think was the fairest way of doing it.
Yeah.
Which sort of takes into account the fact that people are going to come in who produce work that is not suitable, who need training, in which case they're actually costing us time. But occasionally you get people who come in who are pretty good and who can produce stuff that you can use, in which case you might as well pay them for it because you're getting their time. Although, as work experience, having training work experience people is also an enormous drain. So it might not be something we do a huge amount more of. But yeah, in that scenario, if it's a time limit, if it's a week and it's going to give you valuable experience, you know exactly what you're getting out of it, you might as well do it. But if you're going to write something, and that's hard and time consuming and creative, you should either be paid for it or you should own it. The notion that you should either, by all means, if you write it for free because you care, and you put it up on your own blog or on a site that you share with a friend, and you both, a group of friends, and you all care about the same thing, and you're all in the same situation, that's fine. That makes sense. That's basically what this podcast is. But if you don't own it, if you're producing it for a company that's just going to kind of throw it into the abyss on your behalf, And,
It's that it's not an either-or thing. Like, that's how I think of it. Like, if someone says, oh, but we can't pay you, but it's good exposure, it's like, well, if that's true, then it would still be good exposure if you also paid me. It's not like you're giving me exposure in place of the money.
Yeah.
It's like, if you gave me money...
We'd pay you, but then we wouldn't tweet this long.
Yeah. It would, you would get both. And so, for that reason, I would never do it. But at the same time, having said that, I'm cagey on taking a strong stance about how you should never work for free, because as a teenager, I wrote for free for Planet Half-Life, which was a website that was owned and operated by GameSpy, and it had adverts on it, and so GameSpy were making money from it. They were profiting from the work that I was producing them for free. And I arguably was exploited through that, but at the same time I learned a whole bunch. Even though I wasn't getting feedback from any kind of editor, I still learned a whole bunch purely by dint of having a weekly responsibility that I had to write a thing for and all that sort of stuff. And that was valuable to me as a young, as a teenager. I was, 15 when I think I was first published by Planet Half-Life. So I had no expectation of getting paid as a job when I was 15 and I was still at school and that sort of stuff.
It was alright that I was being exploited because I was a minor at the time.
Well, actually, really, because
child labour laws meant
I wrote for Planet Black and White and Planet Max Payne. I'd be interested to see how many people who went on to become writers were teenage labourers for GameSpy at the time. I did it for a free File Planet subscription.
I didn't even get that. I started off writing for a site that was hosted by Planet Half-Life, and then my work ended up getting published by Planet Half-Life itself. And I was pretty happy with that. I sent my work to a guy who went by the name Jabberwocky.
I remember him.
I've done work for free in my life that I definitely don't regret and led to good stuff.
I think, but what I was going to say is the flip side to the child labour side of the coin is that
Often an auspicious start to a sentence.
Children, teenagers, are in a position where they have their lives paid for, and if you're 15 and you're living at home with your parents, and writing for a game site for free is what you do with your evenings, and you're also attending school and eating okay, then that's okay, I think. Well, not okay, but it falls into the realm of worth it for you, even if it's not ethically okay for the person who's taking advantage of your work. It is maybe worth it for you to enter that transaction because it's not going to affect your material chances of living in a healthy and sustainable way, and it might give you skills that are transferable to something you subsequently want to do. What isn't worth it is taking on that kind of risk where you do have to feed yourself and you do have to house yourself.
Yes.
This doesn't necessarily affect whether it's ethical for your employer in that sense to not pay you for their work, for the work. And in many ways, they probably should pay you even if you are a teenager. Because otherwise it sends a message that writing is something that you can just farm out to teenagers whose parents can functionally pay for it by continuing to feed that teenager.
Yeah. I think it's the thing, like you said, you shouldn't do this if you don't own it. And if you want to write stuff, you should team up with a group of friends in order to create a communal blog kind of thing. I, at that point, didn't have the kind of friends for whom I could do it with. So the thing I got out of doing it for Planet Half-Life was that there was a sense of community there. There was a sense of I was one person doing this thing, other people were doing this thing for the same website, and there was some sense of expectation. And I can understand why people find that useful, because I found it useful, as opposed to just writing on my own website, where it can be hard to motivate yourself to write every day on a website where there's no sense of whether people or not are expecting it, whether or not people are reading it, maybe.
Yeah.
And so, it's probably easier nowadays in a day of blogs and WordPress and Tumblr and stuff like that than it was back in 1999 in order to find a bunch of like-minded people with whom to start a website. But in 1999, with my small group of ICQ friends and the people I went to school with, I didn't really have, I didn't know how to do that on my 56k modem.
I think we did the two options here, which is you worked for Planet Half-Life and got stuff published to probably a decent audience back then. And I did the own your thing route. So I've always written about games for as long as I've been into them, and as long as the internet has existed. And I had a blog before the word blog was a thing, and nobody fucking read it. It was just like my corner of the internet where I just posted my thoughts on things. And so I've been writing about that stuff for, probably 8 years before I joined PC Gamer, and that was 10 years ago. And so I took the kind of like own it route, which I don't think is better really. It's still good practice, but you don't get a lot of feedback, so you don't get to adapt that much. You just write your thing and it goes out into the void and no one ever says anything about it, and then you keep on doing it. And that can improve you in some ways, but it's probably less good than actually like hitting the brick wall of an audience and finding out what they think about it.
Maybe the best rule of thumb then is like, if someone's profiting substantially from your work, then you probably should see part of that because you're part of that kind of labor equation. If no one's making any money from it, then, ultimately, you either got to stop doing that thing that no one's making any money from, or accept that and kind of do it for whatever reward you'll get for it. But like hobbyist writing is how you transition into professional writing. So ultimately, you've got to find a way of making it work for you.
Certainly, if you're a newcomer to the field, you should already be doing the thing that you want to do within the field. It's a kind of warning sign when you get an application or a pitch from someone who says, "I really want to write about games," but they're not already writing about games anywhere on the internet. And it's like, well, if you really want to do this thing, why aren't you?
Because there's essentially nothing stopping you from doing it.
So it's even more so than game development, game writing. You really get like if you can't find a way to do that for your own back, then you can have trouble in everything you ever do. Much easier.
Mostly as an editor with a limited budget, you want to like reduce your risk by hiring a person to do the thing that they're already doing somewhere else.
Yeah.
And if they're a person who's already within the industry and they're getting paid, you just want to say to them, hey, come do that thing for us as well. And if they're a person on the internet who's already doing it for free, that you just want to say, keep doing that thing, but I'll give you money for it now. But, and so it's much harder to say to someone, I've never seen you do this thing, but can I pay you money for it? Because you don't know what you're going to get back. And if you look at most of the people who work in this field, that's the case. Like, you used to write for Gaming Daily, I think. Yeah. That's right. Phil Savage, you found, because he wrote a funny thing about, I think, Deus Ex on his own website.
Also write for Gaming Daily.
Yep. Everyone
Tom Senior used to write for Gaming Daily.
Yep.
Yep.
Jazz McDougall, who we hired, he wrote a bunch of like comments on my blog that I really liked, and I think maybe on his blog that I really liked, and then he wrote a competition entry that involves some writing that Craig really liked, and we discovered that
won a PC by submitting to a competition on PC.
Me and Craig had independently been really impressed by his writing, just from doing stuff that had no hope of in itself making any money.
He wrote a story about the difficulties of importing his cats to America and going through that process of putting them into quarantine and that sort of stuff, and it was really funny. And then you got work off the back of it. John Markham, who writes for RPS now, and I don't know if he still gets freelance for PC Gamer.
He's done bits and bobs, yeah.
Yeah, but we used him quite a bit. But he was just the person who wrote funny stuff for our letters pages, and he won the Letter of the Month twice in a row. The second time with a review he wrote of Dishonored, and it was like,
I remember that.
This is a really funny review of Dishonored. You should just do this for us.
I won Letter of the Month PC Zone once for a thing about Tomb Raider, and you wrote some stuff that I liked on the internet, and then you also wrote like a sample article for PC Gamer, right?
I was a commenter on your blog, and then one summer in my second year of university decided, fuck it, I'm not going to get a summer job, I'm going to try and get paid for some writing, and so I wrote a thing and sent it to PC Gamer, and Mark Donald, who was the editor at the time, bought it. And then 5 months later I was full-time at PC Gamer. Hooray!
And I think that, again, that was independent. I think I knew you from my blog comments independently of Mark using that piece, and then we both discovered, we both like this guy's writing.
At risk of us having veered off the question deep into biographical heresy, I think the point is that if you're writing for free, you have to have a really clear goal in mind for why you're doing it and what the target is. And there's those people who get jobs in the industry having worked for free in some context or another, but just being sort of aimlessly exploited by a company that's profiting off your work, and saying that as like, do I work in the industry now? That's not helpful.
Even if the pens are really good.
And it's a fucking amazing pen.
It's the thing, like, if you want a job in this industry, you should be writing stuff. But you don't have to be writing stuff for a larger website, whether it's free or not. You can just be writing stuff on your Tumblr or your own blog. It's not like it impresses the editor by, he's published by this website. You don't give a shit. As long as the piece of writing is good.
That's maybe the point we orbited around. It's like, honestly, I don't give up.
No.
Like, where someone else,
attach it to an email, or stick it on a Tumblr post, or stick it on Blogger. I don't care. It's fine. If it's good,
it's good.
I'll pay you money.
Yeah. You spend enough time making fun of every other website in the industry anyway.
Yep. Ben Anderson writes, "Hey CNCs, I've been playing/watching quite a bit of Spelunky. Dying in that game seems to be a normal part of life. What systems do you feel make it okay/fun to die so much? I'm a new listener as of last week. I'm loving the show so far, Ben. Dear Ben, look back through our archive or click on the Spelunky tag on the side of this particular podcast when it goes up on crateorcrowbar.com.
Crate or crowbar?
Crate or crowbar.
Ultimate choice. Question time.
Because you'll find we like Spelunky quite a lot, and
we've talked about it in some
talked about it on quite a few little podcasts.
The other day, actually this will tie a little bit into a question we'll answer later. I played Spelunky for the first time in ages because I wanted to play something to unwind a little bit, and it's a nice relaxing game. So I played the Daily Challenge, which we used to do, most of us Crate and Crowbar people and a bunch of other people besides would all play the Daily Challenge every day and compare our scores, and that petered out and we haven't done it for ages. I played it just the other day, and the interesting thing was, like, when you finish it, I got quite far, and I had the shield, which is my favourite thing in the game. Just crush people with it. And eventually I got blown up by a UFO in the ice caves, and then when I saw the score, I was really interested to see, I don't really care how I did, but I wanted to see who else is on the scoreboard, because the scoreboard it takes you to is your friends. And I'm like, who else of my friends are still playing this? Because Chris Remo for ages was playing it. He played it every single day for maybe a year. That kind of length of time, completely consistently. He hadn't missed a day in so long that it became a thing where he couldn't miss a day. And he's not doing it anymore. Because the only other person on the scoreboard was Chris Donlan, who now works at Eurogamer and has always done freelance for them. And our scores were within 200 gold of each other. So we got almost the same score. And yeah, he still plays regularly. He's the only one.
I had an answer to the question which may be slightly different to what we previously would have talked to about Spelunky. I think the potted answer to this question based on Spelunky chats of the past is when your death kind of emerges from kind of some impossible circumstance or kind of merging of systems where, even though it's frustrating that you've lost your run, it's different and memorable every time. It's not the same death as you had last time, or you own it in the sense that not only is it your fault, but it's a unique story to tell, and therefore it's less it stings a little bit less. But really, I've been thinking about this a bit differently recently because I've been playing a lot of Blood Bowl, which obviously is a console game. We'll talk about it in its own pod sometime soon. But this applies to the Souls games as well. I think, the reason those games I think are brilliant, even though you die a lot in them, is because every death teaches you something. Material about either the world or a particular enemy or about your own weapon set or about a boss battle or something, in the sense that the death serves a purpose. And there's lots of ways Bloodborne tweaks the formula of how regularly you acquire and lose resources in a way that makes death feel more like a willing experiment sometimes, where you kind of enter a scenario where you feel like you're up against the odds. And even though succeeding would be amazing, dying is not this kind of crushing loss because you've gained intel. And that's not something the game measures. It's not you filled out your XP bar or something. It's just, there's a really strong transmitted sense of, okay, I went really far into this area of the map and I died and I lost all of that progress in physical terms, but I now know infinitely more about what's around that corner than I did before I did that. So the death stings less than it would otherwise. And I think that's an interesting counterpoint to the notion that the reason that these games aren't roguelikes is because, like Spelunky, is because they're not randomly generated. And it's actually a case against random generation, that kind of really satisfying sense of having almost that life had one purpose, and it was to map out, like a sonar ping, as much of this part of the map as I could before I died. And so even though dying sucked and I lost all of the echoes I pulled together in that time, I still came away with a kind of like tangible improvement that makes it feel less bad.
See, I argue that the same is true in Spelunky. Because when people talk about death in Spelunky, they say that the reason it doesn't become frustrating, the reason it remains fresh, is that it procedurally generates the levels, so it's different the next time around. But for me, it's much more about the things which aren't different. It's about the thing you just learnt about the creature that killed you, and how that changes your mental simulation of the game the next time you get there. Spelunky is a great game, and it's not a frustrating game, because when you die it's your fault and you always understand why you died, and the reason for that is that the rules are fixed in place for how far does a frog jump in any situation, at what angle does a bat descend from the ceiling, how does a man-eating plant behave, all these kinds of things. And so although the situations that you encounter are different and mix these elements in different ways, the elements themselves are fixed rules. And so, you know, for me, I played Spelunky, the original free version first, and I didn't know anyone else who'd ever played the game, and I did not know that there was a second world. Like, I was playing through the kind of the main, what's now called the mains. I'm not even sure if it was called that. It was just World 1. I was playing through World 1 without a sense of, does the tile set change? When does the tile set change? I don't know. And so when I finally got past level 4 and, trees and grass and frogs and what? Oh, I'm dead. And it was just, it was that kind of like instant kind of death. But it was like, I know what that thing does now. I want to get back to that place. I want to learn more about that place.
I'll never die to those again. I know that rule now.
And you go back and you learn more each time. You learn more about these fixed rules that then let you get a little bit further each time. And it also has this added effect of, as you say, when you know fucking damn well how the fucking blue frogs work, but when they kill you, and you know exactly what they were going to do, but they still killed you because there was some disconnect between your knowledge in your brain and your ability to execute that with your thumbs. It's kind of funny. You laugh at yourself in that situation because you're like, oh, I knew better than that. Why? How did I get killed by a fucking bat? No. And so I feel like it's the same thing. It's that your death is a measure of your progress in understanding the mechanics of that game.
It's the same thing, actually. Yeah, you're right.
You know, you're planting a flag in the snow even as you collapse, and then you try and get a little bit further than that flag next time around.
I think if you have too many of the latter kind of death, like the kind of I knew what was going to happen and it happened anyway, then that's when real frustration comes in. That's when games become bullshit. Like, it kind of works in Spelunky because there's so many systems that when you get caught out by something you should know, it's normally because something else has put you off your game. Like, you dive into a tiki trap because you're running away from something you don't understand, or whatever. Or the level layout is weird, and even though it's a familiar element, it's arranged in a way that you're actually not sure how you're going to get past it. You know, when games become bullshit, maybe this is back to the Ori and the Blind Forest thing, but it's like when you have a repeated series of jumps or puzzles or traps to evade that you know exactly what you're expected to do. It's just that the doing it is fiddly and awkward and boring. That's when death is no longer rewarding.
Yeah. Which I think kind of Spelunky dodges, or at least compensates for, with the items that you have, because the ropes and the bombs are shortcut buttons. They're basically, I kind of know what all these things do, but I don't know how I'm going to get past this. Throw a bomb at it, you know. And so then it becomes about, when you get to that situation, it still feels like your fault. It doesn't feel like the generation has fucked you. It feels like it's your fault because you used that bomb in a situation 10 minutes ago when you didn't really need to, but you used it anyway because you saw a cape through the wall that you wanted to go get or something like that. And you're like, I should have saved that bomb. I used that bomb frivolously when actually it would have saved my life here. So it still kind of gives you that feeling of risk reward and feeling of everything is down to choices you made. And so it's still a learning experience, because the next time you come along, you're going to not use that bomb so frivolously. You're going to hold on to it.
if not, that might be the wrong decision, and that's when that gets really kind of complicated and interesting.
I love Spelunky. I think it's my favourite game ever. Mike Sandels writes, Dear Pan and Punchline, interesting discussion this week on the PC/console divide. I agree, but would add something, which also relates to the Bloodborne on PC stuff. I've greatly enjoyed playing Dark Souls 1 and 2, if enjoy is the right word. They're uniquely satisfying. Getting into them was entirely the fault of your DS1 YouTube playthrough. I still watch the Four Kings fight now and then. Rich and Marsh deserve a medal for that. Anyway, I played them in my study at a desk with mouse and keyboard. Heresy! Why? Well, I'm not that interested in living room gaming, as discussed. So, not that interested in consoles. So, not that interested in controllers. I have years of muscle memory in gaming with mouse and keyboards, and it's hard to pick up something different and be any good. Not being any good is a problem in a Souls game. Mouse and keyboard was easier for me than getting good enough with a controller. As regards Bloodborne, this is why the just buy a PS4 argument doesn't work, at least for me. A PS4 can't provide the experience of playing at my desk with mouse and keyboard. It can't provide what a PC version would provide if there were one, which there isn't and won't be. First world problems. In any event, mouse and keyboard is, as far as I know, only really an option for PCs, and this is a major distinction between PCs and consoles. So, at last, questions. How prevalent is strong preference for mouse and keyboard in PC gaming these days? To put it another way, how weird am I in playing Dark Souls that way? To what extent does the option for mouse and keyboard on PC affect your choice of platform for multi-platform games? Should I just get a controller and get good? Cheers and keep pasting those cards. Mike.
Pasting those cards.
I think maybe pasting.
Pasting?
Well,
Because then it'd be casting those cards.
Oh yeah, pasting those cards.
But I mean, pasting is a correct pronunciation if it's spelt that way.
Yep.
I think I once was like you. What was his name?
Oh god, I scrolled down.
This is
Mike.
your villain speech.
That's
That's so different. What's the name?
Not so different. I'm sorry, could you tell me again?
Mike.
We're not so different, you and I, Mike. I once was like you. And I particularly, I still do hate playing a first-person shooter with the gamepad, and I can't do it at all. And in general, I just dislike gamepads. And then eventually I kind of got used to using them for like certain kinds of platformers. And I think Spelunky was kind of the turning point, because Spelunky was originally a PC game and you could only play it with keyboard. Literally only keyboard, no mouse, no gamepad, nothing. And that was the free version. And then when it came out on... Actually, a long time before it came out on Xbox, we had the IGF build of it, because it was submitted to the IGF, and often the way they do that is, even if it's an Xbox game, they submit a PC build of it. And so we had a PC build of the Xbox version of Spelunky, which could only be played with an Xbox controller. So I had to play that way. And got used to that. And Xbox controller, like, it's quite nice for platformers in general. I don't really recognise any benefit that it has over a mouse and keyboard if you're equally comfortable with both. But in my extreme old age, I have come to appreciate the controller for the fact that just because it's not a mouse and keyboard, and so like the three things I spend my day on are developing games, checking Twitter and typing things and replying to emails and that kind of stuff, and playing games. And developing games and checking Twitter, etc., both have to be done with a mouse and keyboard pretty much to any kind of effective degree. And for the most part, so does playing games. Most of the games I play, I kind of have to play with mouse and keyboard. Just because I don't like playing with a controller. And so, at the end of a day, when I want to play video games, it's actually like a problem if the game I want to play I can only play with mouse and keyboard, because I've just been using that the entire day, and now I've got RSI and my fingers are killing me, and I probably shouldn't, just for health reasons, continue to use the same exact control system for that as well. And so I've started to like really become biased towards anything that I can play with a 360 controller. So Spelunky, that's why I was playing Spelunky the other day, was I just wanted to play anything that used the 360 controller, because I couldn't use a mouse and keyboard any longer. And I've recently got back into Batman Arkham City, which has not the game itself, but the challenge modes. They have like fighting arenas. The combat system of that is the main reason I like it, and that's a game that works really well on 360 pad because it's actually easier to pull off all of the elaborate combos and stuff, like the really difficult key combinations that you have to hold down to do certain special moves are just 2 buttons on the face buttons of the 360 controller. There'll be 2 buttons that are next to each other, so you can literally press them with the same thumb. And I love that combat system, and it's a good fit anyway for the controller because it doesn't involve that much really precise aiming exactly. It kind of like intuits who you want to attack and that kind of stuff. And also lately I've been thinking, like, 360 pad support for Heat Signature, the game I'm working on, is not a big priority in terms of the final game. Like Gunpoint, I never did it because it was never that big a deal. There's no one who can't play with mouse and keyboard. There's no one who's sitting there with a PC who just has the 360 controller plugged into it and nothing else. Like, that person doesn't exist, so it's not a massive priority. But for Heat Signature, I'm probably going to do it just because I want to play it with a 360 controller, just because I don't want to be using mouse and keyboard all day, every day, for everything I ever do. So, and, you know, developing the game, I'm going to have to type, I'm going to have to use the mouse. But for testing it, which is, you know, maybe 30% of the time I actually spend on it, it would be great if I was doing that with a different thing, so my hands weren't gradually breaking.
I do find I mean, like you, I use a mouse and keyboard all day long, from about 7 AM till at least 6 PM is just on mouse and keyboard. And they don't have any kind of physical feedback to them, or at least not in the same way as a controller with analog sticks do. And I'm not just talking about the rumble, but I often play platformers or FIFA, say, because I want to feel something in my hands. I want
the emotion of jumping or kicking.
There's a tactile feeling to manipulating something on an analog stick or with an analog trigger in your hands on a controller that you don't get from a mouse and keyboard, and just using menu screens and that sort of stuff, you don't get that. And so sometimes I want something that feels nice in the hands to use. Like in the way that Ori in the Blind Forest, the jump feels kind of nice to use with the air control and stuff like that, and you feel more connected to the physics of it when you're using a controller versus mouse and keyboard.
I mean, at the same time, I get the people who have used to a mouse and keyboard, and that's what they feel capable with, and learning a new control scheme for every new game is, I mean, in Dark Souls is a good example. I think that's one of the good things about this question, is points out that, like, it's a hard game, it's going to demand a lot from you anyway. You'd rather go in at least having a basic facility with the control input device rather than having to learn a whole new one for it. Yeah. And I kind of get that. But by the same token, I think, and this maybe links to a discussion we've had previously, but, like, I don't necessarily think that the mouse and keyboard, even though it's unique to PC gaming pretty much, with the exception of Quake on the Dreamcast, should be emblematic of PC gaming, because if anything, like, weird input devices are emblematic of PC gaming. Somebody's crazy flight simulator setup, which
VR is going to be,
yeah,
like, led by PC gaming.
Like, I think, you know, the thing that defines input devices as a kind of, as a definition for PC gaming is, it's just kind of it being a huge question mark. It's like, what does this game suit? And you just pick the series of devices that make it work for you. And being able to pick that kind of particular set of, that particular config that kind of creates the best possible experience. Like, yeah, like, I mean, I play a lot of PlayStation 4 at the moment because, for similar reasons as you guys, like, it provides a tangible break from what I do for work. Because if I'm playing a game on there, the two games I play a lot of, neither of them are available on PC. And that means that it doesn't come into the correct... It's not only a physical break in terms of sitting somewhere different, doing something different, but it's also a profound kind of subject matter break away from, like, what I could be expected to write about. So I don't think necessarily there's anything, like, un-PC about playing with a controller or not with a controller, meaning both senses of
Unless
that
you
word.
shout racism as you do
Yeah,
it.
yeah, unless you're really racist, which gives you broader problems. But yeah, like equally though, I don't think it's unreasonable for PC gamers to want mouse and keyboard options wherever it's feasible with the game, because that is, as Tom points out, the input device that everybody has access to.
Yeah. Thomas writes, Dear CNC, in Sid Meier's Pirates, I learned the relative location of Haiti and Cuba. In Sid Meier's Civilization, I learned that polytheistic cultures probably had not spent enough time on research to have developed monotheism. I think all games are educational, but the question is, what do we learn? What knowledge or skill have you learned in a game that had applications in real life? What have you learned, in air quotes, in a game only to realise, possibly to your embarrassment, that it does not apply to the meat world? Thomas.
I like the idea that polytheistic cultures just sort of haven't looked into it long enough to realise that most of their gods are false, actually. Like,
That's just
if
your
you
uncle.
research it.
That drunk guy. That's not a god. That's just a guy you saw last week. What if
Really, if you think about it, you get down to just the one. There's just the one real god. And
the one you don't really know anything about? What if there was one that we just hadn't described yet? Like the random question mark on the Street Fighter character select screen.
That's God.
Yeah.
When I read this question, the thing that sprung to mind, I mean, I struggled to come up with any useful knowledge I've gained from video games. But I've gained a lot of useless knowledge, and most of it is places. Like, so, Liberty Island, I've talked about before about going to Liberty Island in real life, having played Deus Ex a hell of a lot, and realising, like, I know the shape of this pier before I even step off the ferry. And I know that when I go here, I'll have to turn left, because that's where you turn left at the start of Deus Ex every single time I've played it, the 26 times I've played it. And the actual, like, I think the statue is pretty different in terms of, like, the scale of the base and the actual statue itself, and also we couldn't go up inside, so I don't know if there was an SF terrorist leader at the top.
UNATCO weren't based there.
Yeah, there was no UNATCO base on the left.
Homeless people around bins and sheds on the other side.
I didn't go that far around, I don't think. So, like, embarrassing gaps in knowledge between video games and real life. Turned out I wasn't an nano-augmented agent. I didn't have license to tase anyone. That was against the law.
Should have taken the Gep gun.
I didn't take the Get gun. My brother was there for some reason. He offered me the choice for the Get gun. I didn't take it. I thought I wanted the dart rifle, but then it turns out you get that later on anyway in that level.
The gift shop.
So I'm pretty sure I've been to New York before GTA 4. I don't really remember, like, sort of... I mean, Times Square obviously recognise, but I don't remember, like, individual neighbourhoods navigating them correctly. Whereas Los Angeles in GTA 5, partly playing myself, but also, like, before it was out, I watched a Let's Play by Tom Bramwell from Eurogamer, like, driving around, and he and I have been on some of the same press trips to Venice Beach, which is, you know, the kind of coast bit of Los Angeles. And he was driving around streets that he and I had been down on press trips, and I was realising, watching it, like, shit, I know this place, I know all this place. And there's, you know, missions to take you into the, I think it's just called the canals, the kind of, like, private residences, kind of inland from the beach, where it's just a grid network of canals, essentially, with kind of luxury homes, and there's a GTA 5 mission where you take a jet ski down there and you're chasing someone who's, I think, kidnapped your daughter, or she's run off with him. And realising, like, oh yeah, actually, like, I've been there before, and then, like, a month later I went there again and walked down those same places and think, oh yeah, I played this in GTA. So not useful knowledge, but interesting.
Definitely, there's a lot of stuff I know, well, picked up about, like, Renaissance architecture from Assassin's Creed.
Wow.
Because I'm, as I expressed on the podcast many times, I'm the kind of person who reads a lot of the codex entries. And that stuff is actually, like, you know, probably Wikipedia derived, but actual information about landmarks. And they're not obviously laid out exactly the same, and it would be misleading of me. Actually, I have been in situations where I've gone to Italy and realised that it would be really hard to climb a lot of those edifices.
Yes.
Like, they don't have equally spaced handholds that a magic ninja
For good reason, I think.
could scale. Not just that it would be harder than holding down right trigger and A, but that it would actually not necessarily even be possible for a human to do what Ezio Auditore does, which might have already been obvious to most people. But more specifically, the information about when things were built and why they were built and who they were built for and kind of like what the artistic styles of the period, that stuff was actually like, obviously operating at a certain level of simplicity for the sake of getting it across in a codex entry that's about 200 words long, but interesting enough and on point enough that I ended up knowing quite a bit more about that era than I did before. Likewise, Assassin's Creed Revelations, which was set in Constantinople, teaches you things about, you know, I don't think I really knew, like, what all those landmarks were. Like the ancient market, whose name I've completely forgotten off the tip of my tongue, and like the Hagia Sophia and stuff like that. Then I remember seeing it in Skyfall, and knowing, because it's in the opening action sequence of Skyfall, knowing exactly how that stuff was laid out, because I'd seen it in Assassin's Creed. I think, in terms of it not being useful, like, Rome Total War, the first one, triggered my interest in ancient Rome. And then I went away and learned loads about ancient Rome independently, like podcasts and reading books and stuff, because I was really interested in it. And went back to Rome and realised that actual Roman tactics didn't really work quite as they should. And then played Rome 2, really excited that they'd advanced it. And I liked Rome 2, even though it had problems when it came out. But ancient Roman tactics really don't work in that game, which is sort of, I guess, the opposite thing. It's where actual knowledge kind of comes in and completely screws you, because you try and create, like, Romans had incredible discipline, had, invented the notion of a rotating front line, where the guys at the front fight for a bit, and as soon as they're tired or wounded, they swap with the guys behind them and have a break. And in this way, you just sort of mince barbarians like a combine harvester. If you try and recreate that within Rome 2, like trying to swap units forward and back, they take a long time to figure out like how moving forward and around each other works, and kind of think about it for a bit and wobble around, and by the time you've done that, it's kind of given the enemy a million flanking bonuses because your troops are technically retreating or not retreating, and the whole thing falls apart. But by the same token, it was the original game that kind of was just accurate enough to give me an interest in how all those different unit types work together and made me want to go and research it more. So,
I think for me it's historical strategy games, similarly, which both spark my interest and probably teach me things which are bullshit. But, I mean, most recently Europa Universalis 4 is set kind of during the Reformation kind of time, and as much as you can decide, for example, that your country is going to embrace Protestantism and then have to deal with the fallout as the Pope decides that he doesn't like you very much now, and all your neighbours decide that they don't like you very much because they're still Catholic and that kind of stuff. And so you get a kind of a version of history there where I don't always know what parts are genuine history and what parts are the alternate history that's being formed by the AI of the game. And sometimes I just choose not to look that up. So, ask me about the, existence of Italy and what preceded it. I can tell you answers to those questions, but I don't know which of those answers are true and which of those answers are just things that happened because I went to war with Venice.
It's the Geth, right?
Yeah, definitely the Geth. Actually, another one for me is like, I think my interest in like sword fighting. I'm now mega into the history of sword fighting, like really, really interesting and a cool area of like ongoing historical study. Because as reenactment gets better, it starts to inform back on understanding of ancient technique, and it kind of gives you a better sense of how stuff works. Loads of good stuff on the internet about that. But that started with stuff like Jedi Knight. Like when I was a teenager, playing like Jedi Knight 2 and Jedi Academy Online, and getting used to those games as interpretation of swordplay, which were really good compared to what other games were doing with regards to how melee weapons work. Like, no form of weaponry in human history is more abstracted in games than melee weaponry. Like, the idea of, like, area of effect whirlwind attacks is in itself the most absurd notion that doesn't work physically, humanly, or any other way, tactically, in any context.
My very weird video game attack is the stomp that damages everyone around you.
Yeah.
If you have legs that can stamp the ground so hard that the shockwaves deal damage to everyone around, just kick them! If you could kick that hard, you would obliterate them into atoms of blood.
But I remember learning to fence, like when I eventually kind of decided I wanted to figure out how that actually worked and started doing classical fencing. And the thing you learn in fencing is that you really don't need to stab someone a lot to make them not want to fight you anymore. Like, the amount that you need to put a sword in someone before they're like, nah, is actually very low. And games have taught you that, like, every death blow, every special move has an accompanying scaling tell. Or, like, the notion that a sword requires a wind-up. That it's like a golf club. That you got to really pull that thing back before you take someone's arm off or whatever. And maybe that's true in certain contexts, but like it takes a pound of pressure for most blades to go through a human. So it's more about getting past the blade than it is about getting into the person, because that's the trivial bit on the other side of whatever their defense is. And actual sword fighting takes place with incremental degrees of wrist movement at very close range, because that's all that matters ultimately. And you could see this every single time you had new fences in, because everybody had learned from the same sources. It was either video games or films, where sword fighting is always a huge series of arcing motions. Or in the case of Jedi Knight, like sometimes you just turn around, because one of the most powerful moves in Jedi Knight was like the heavy back, which would be when you turn around and stab backwards, because that did more damage for some reason. So you would turn around and stab someone as because why not? And that's not true at all. And you watch people kind of come in and expect to kind of like, well, I want to kill this person, so I clearly need to start back here like I'm throwing a shot put and swing at them. And no.
With my weightless sword.
Yeah, with a totally weightless sword that really just needs to hit them a bit. I mean, imagine like how out of it you are if you accidentally cut yourself while cooking. Like, it doesn't take a lot.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's totally useless. And that's the one thing I'd love games to get better at as well. Like, I think melee combat is just the one thing games just can't do at all.
I still like Died by the Sword, the Treyarch game they did before they got sucked into being the Call of Duty studio, where you hold down a button and swing your mouse side to side, and that controls your flailing arm.
It was not bad at simulating what would happen if you did move your arm that way, but you wouldn't move your arm that way.
No.
Even if you could, you just sort of wouldn't want to do that.
And it was the golf club thing, if you just wave your arm around and sometimes your sword collides.
I think the caveat is games abstract that kind of thing, and they still create an experience that's a bit like sword fighting. Like, I love Blade Symphony, and I went back to it recently, and I realised that like it is like learning to ride a bike, and you kind of go back in. You kind of remember how things fit together. And the stuff you're doing is absurd, but the kind of interplay between mechanics is like structurally similar to what you might be looking for in an actual sword fight. It's just that the actions themselves are totally different. So like the notion of trying to anticipate someone's actions based on their movement is the same, but that movement is unlikely to be a huge swirly sword attack or a leaping somersault into a pirouette. Because that's literally the last thing you would ever do.
I guess I'm always surprised and slightly disappointed that there was never like a Toribash sequel or spin-off that had swords or other weapons in it.
Yeah.
Because surely making it turn-based is the way in which you solve the problem with melee sword fighting.
Yeah.
Maybe not in terms of the satisfying feeling of it, but in terms of the actual underlying tactics of it and making those overt turn-based is the way to do it. And that's all the questions we have. And all the time we have for this podcast.
If you would like to send us a question, you can do so by emailing us at questions@crateandcrowbar.com. You can leave a question on the forum, which is at crateandcrowbar.com/forum, which is also where you find our various discussion threads for episodes, as well as people to play games with and people to talk about games with and thing. It's good. You can also tweet us at Crate and Crowbar, and we'll put a call out for questions before we record each new episode. Or, finally, you can tweet us as individuals. I'm C. Thurston, that's THURSTEN.
I'm Pentanact, that's PNT80ACT.
And I am at Gonnas, GONNAS.
Thanks for listening.
We all did that at different speeds.